Chapter 1082, Gula and the Kurdish King. After surviving a near-death ordeal and pulling himself back from the brink, Shahru discovered that his combat power had skyrocketed. He was now at least 5 times stronger than before. He could literally feel energy crackling through his muscles and bones, a force so overwhelming it seemed as if the very earth bowed beneath his feet. Excitement and arrogance danced in his eyes. With a single blow, he believed he could flatten mountains. But beneath that rush of strength lay Shahru's deepest despair. He had become Ethan's instrument, an unstoppable warrior shackled by engineered loyalty. Every time he tried to resist, every time he strove to break those invisible chains, he slammed into an unyielding barrier. Freedom was impossible. Even death offered no escape, for Ethan had tampered with Shahru's very mind, forging absolute obedience into his character. All his memories and abilities remained intact, but his will was no longer his own. It was that enforced devotion, the unbreakable bond of loyalty, that robbed Shahru of any hope of making his own choices. Ethan's orders were absolute. Every soldier under his command must obey without question, even when those orders clashed with their deepest convictions. That morning, a strange, potent aura had settled over the earth, an energy unlike anything he'd ever encountered. It wasn't the signature of his troops, nor of any known life form. A chill ran through him. Could this herald a new threat? After all, Dr. Garrow's android army was already deployed worldwide. Moments later, the communications officer's voice crackled over the intercom. "Sir, we're detecting 2 high-level power signatures at the planetary boundary. One belongs to Gula, the other to the Kurdish King." Ethan frowned. Gula and the Kurdish King. Suddenly, it all made sense. In this altered timeline, Frieza had been destroyed by General Zod and his Kryptonian Legion. To prevent Frieza's forces from collapsing into infighting, Ethan had ordered Dr. Garrow to seize control of the Frieza army immediately. As a result, none of Frieza's lieutenants ever learned of their leader's fate until now. The Kurdish King and even Frieza's own brother, Gula, had only just learned of Frieza's death. Gula, whose very name echoed the irony of cooler, possessed an extra transformation beyond Frieza's final form. He was every bit as ruthless, yet infinitely more composed, and he commanded a fanatical loyalty that Frieza could only envy. Ethan's jaw set. He tapped his console. "All units, fortify the southern sector. Activate anti-air turrets and deploy Dr. Garrow's android divisions on rapid response alert. Track every spike in their power readings. We face 2 formidable enemies, and we cannot afford to be caught off guard." Outside the command deck's reinforced windows, the first silhouettes of 2 invading legions appeared against the dawn sky. Earth's defenders braced themselves for the storm about to break. Yet even King Kurd and his son Gula were relics of a bygone era, much like Frieza, long surpassed by newer threats. In the main timeline, Cell and Androids 17 and 18 would soon make short work of either of them. And though Gula had held his own against Super Saiyan Goku and Vegeta in the movies, he'd never faced them at their full strength during the Android saga. When Shahru and the others reached the battlefield's edge, their breath caught in their throats. Dr. Garrow's army of androids was locked in a brutal clash with 2 towering, fearsome figures, King Kurd himself and his son Gula. "Dr. Garrow?" Shahru whispered, staring in disbelief. It took only a moment for them to realize that this was not the kindly scientist they knew, but the Dr. Garrow of the main timeline, legendary creator of the Red Ribbon androids, who had somehow taken refuge in Ethan's service and now stood as his right-hand man. King Kurd and Gula, emperors of countless star systems, had swaggered onto Earth with overweening confidence. Their plan was simple: obliterate every living thing on this blue planet, and once again prove that nothing in the universe could challenge their absolute power. But standing against them were Ethan's forces and Dr. Garrow's dreaded android legions, ready to defend Earth at all costs. Fate, it seems, never tires of playing cruel tricks. This time, the challenge they faced was unlike anything they'd encountered before. As they squared off against Dr. Garrow's android army, it became painfully clear how naive their original assumptions had been. In this primary timeline, Dr. Garrow had managed to obtain an astonishing variety of genetic material: Hulk's gamma-irradiated cells, Thor's divine Asgardian genes, and DNA samples from countless alien species under the Galactic Empire's rule. He wove all of these into his creations, producing androids far stronger than even future Trunks number 17 and number 18. Kuriza's strength, by comparison, was laughable. When Gula entered the fray, he immediately ascended to his final form, an extra transformation beyond even Frieza's, and his power surged. Yet no sooner had he assumed that ultimate shape than the androids swarmed him, forcing him to the ground. Undeterred, Gula launched himself at the nearest artificial man, brimming with confidence. But a single, devastating punch met him instead, so powerful it sent him rocketing through the air. He crashed onto the battlefield in a cloud of dust, utterly beaten back. How can this be? Gula's roar of disbelief shook the air, his voice quivering with shock and rage. The Kurdish king's face went pale as he watched his greatest warrior brought low. Never before had he seen Gula in such a helpless, broken state. Until now, they'd believed themselves among the universe's supreme powers. Dr. Gero stood off to one side, hands clasped behind his back, a self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. Frieza's genes are invaluable, he said, his tone rich with ambition. But the more of your family's blood I can study, the greater my breakthroughs. Each word dripped with Dr. Gero's unquenchable thirst for knowledge and power. To him, every living being was nothing more than a data set, yet the Frieza lineage was the ultimate prize, one whose raw potential far exceeded any sample he'd obtained so far. Flames of vengeance lit up Gula's eyes as he forced himself to his feet. He would not endure the android's humiliation, nor tolerate an insult to his clan. With a guttural shout, he launched himself at Dr. Gero, determined to shatter the doctor beneath his fist. But Gula's blow barely grazed the edge of Dr. Gero's cloak before another android smashed him to the ground. A steel-toed boot slammed down onto his skull, the weight so immense it felt as if it might crush his very thoughts. Pain erupted behind Gula's eyes, and darkness threatened to swallow him. In that moment, he realized his raw power meant nothing against these remorseless creations. Ethan's body quaked with agony, and he lacked even the strength to struggle free. He was crushed to the ground, every nerve aflame, watching helplessly as his foes trampled both his body and his pride. Humiliation and despair coiled tightly in his chest, threatening to shatter what remained of his resolve. Then, with a roar that echoed across the battlefield, Ethan finally snapped. "I'll make you all pay, with your lives." He unleashed the Frieza clan's ultimate weapon, the planetary blasting bomb. In an instant, a colossal sphere of crackling energy materialized above his palm, its surface swirling with unbearable heat. It spun slowly, radiating a blinding, star-bright light, like a dying sun hurtling toward oblivion. King Kurd's eyes widened in terror. Even he knew how utterly catastrophic this technique could be. He lunged backward, desperate to escape the bomb's inevitable fallout. After all, Frieza clan warriors could survive unprotected in the void of space, an environment that would kill any Saiyan or Earthling in seconds. Below that brilliant rotating orb of destruction, the battlefield fell silent. The fates of all who stood against Ethan hung in the balance, poised between cosmic annihilation and a last chance at mercy. Chapter 1083, The Inhuman Dr. Gro. A colossal bomb streaked across the sky like a meteor, then struck the planet's surface with apocalyptic force. The ground shattered, rock and soil erupted in every direction, and the very crust convulsed as though the world itself might tear apart. The androids reacted instantly. Before the planetary bomb's energy could fully unleash its devastation, they unleashed a synchronized counterstrike, a blinding wave of force that met the bomb's power head-on. The two energies collided in a blinding flash, triggering a violent annihilation that abruptly snuffed out the explosion and saved the planet from total destruction. Dr. Gula, who had designed the bomb to guarantee his conquest of this world, stared in stunned disbelief. He barely had time to recover before Ethan, the lead android, seized the moment. With inhuman speed, Ethan closed the distance and drove a devastating punch into Gula's abdomen. The impact reverberated like an earthquake, shaking mountains and rattling the air itself. Gula staggered, a white-hot pain tearing through his gut. His organs felt as if they'd been wrenched from their sockets, and waves of nausea washed over him, so fierce he nearly vomited. For the first time since rising to cosmic infamy, fear glimmered in his eyes. But this was only the beginning. Dr. Gro's inhuman plans were far from over. Dr. Garrow's energy absorption device slid into Gula's body like a silent, merciless probe. The culmination of years of Dr. Garrow's research, this machine didn't merely collect ambient energy, it could tear the life force straight from any living organism. Now, it hungrily drained every ounce of Gula's fighting energy and vital strength, reducing the once formidable warrior to a trembling shell. Gula felt his power ebbing away, his muscles going slack as dizziness set in. He struggled to resist the force consuming him from within, but it was already too late. Dr. Garrow watched with a satisfied smile as the device did its work. His mind raced with possibilities. Ever since Ethan had defeated him and exposed him to the wider reaches of the Galactic Empire, Dr. Garrow's vision had expanded beyond anything he'd imagined. He was determined to push the boundaries of life itself, transforming living beings into more powerful artificial humans and exploring the infinite potential of technology. Dr. Garrow's laboratory thrummed with barely contained power as he calibrated the final readings on the containment unit. He turned to face Gula, the newest product of his experiments. "Excellent," he murmured, his eyes gleaming. "Your energy reserves are exactly what I need. The power within you will be invaluable for my next breakthrough." A sudden shift in the air drew his gaze to the opposite end of the chamber. In the dim glow of the observation windows stood a lone figure. "Shalu," he said, hardly believing his own words. Shalu stepped forward, face impassive. He was one of Garrow's earliest prototypes, a project the doctor had intended to finish long ago, only to abandon it when Ethan suddenly appeared and stole all of Garrow's attention. Now, after months of neglect, Shalu stood before him at last. "Dr. Garrow," he replied, voice cool and detached. Nearby, Cell hovered in his imperfect first form, the crowning achievement of Garrow's early work, now rendered obsolete by advances that had followed. Dr. Garrow studied him with a scrutinizing eye, as though assessing an old sketch that once inspired him. "I didn't expect you to show up here," Garrow said quietly, "but I'm afraid your design is outdated. In this era, your power no longer impresses me." There was a flicker of regret in Garrow's expression, quickly replaced by excitement for what lay ahead. Even Cell, once hailed as the pinnacle of his genius, paled in comparison to the cutting-edge resources he now commanded. At Garrow's words, Shalu's composure cracked ever so slightly, his sculpted features hardening. It wasn't fear for Garrow's fate that stirred him, but the sudden, painful doubt about his own worth in the face of such cold dismissal. "See," El's voice trembled with both determination and frustration. "I am your greatest creation. I simply haven't reached my final form." He clenched his fists, convinced that given enough time and resources, he would transcend all limits and become the universe's supreme being. Dr. Garrow, however, merely shook his head, a distant look in his eyes. "Still so naive, Cell," Dr. Garrow said quietly, studying him. "Even if you attain that perfect body you crave, you won't be my crowning achievement. You're just one of many cells I've experimented on across alternate timelines. This," he gestured dismissively, "is as far as I could go on my own. Fortunately, I met His Majesty Ethan. Through him, I've gained access to the genes of countless alien and powerful life forms. Now I can craft truly flawless beings." Cell's anger exploded. He couldn't accept being dismissed so easily. "No, I won't believe it. I am perfection incarnate. I am invincible." Dr. Garrow regarded him coolly as Cell's fury reached a fever pitch. "Very well. If you insist on testing your invincibility, then let's proceed." He stepped aside and called out, "Bring him in." Ethan stormed into the laboratory without knocking. At the center of the chamber stood Dr. Garrow, a startling figure with blue skin, long pink hair, and a single enormous eye above a cavernous mouth. "Dr. Garrow," Ethan began, striding to the nearest console, "Boros is dead, and you still insist on reviving him." Dr. Garrow's eye glinted. "Your Majesty, Boros is far too valuable to discard. Among all the species I've encountered, human, Saiyan, extraterrestrial, none match his raw potential." Ethan's jaw tightened. Thanos reduced Boros to elementary particles. How could you possibly reconstruct him? "Boros's regenerative powers are unprecedented," the scientist explained calmly. "Months ago, under the pretense of helping him find a worthy adversary, I extracted and cryogenically preserved 90% of his cellular tissue. That repository allowed me to reclaim his genetic blueprint even after Thanos' attack." "You saved his cells in advance?" Ethan echoed, incredulous. "Precisely," Dr. Garrow replied. Even if his head had been lost, the core DNA sample was intact. From there, I spliced in gene sequences from apex predators, mythic beasts, and other powerful aliens. The result is a being who not only matches Boros's original might, but surpasses it utterly. Ethan turned to the containment sarcophagus at the room's center, where Boros's form floated in a stasis field. Vital signs flickered on the monitors, stabilizing, awakening. "You've created a monster with no rival," Ethan said softly. "No one who can stand against him." Dr. Jarrow's mouth curved into a grin that revealed rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Exactly the point, Your Majesty, a perfect weapon for an unassailable victory." Dr. Gro's grin stretched wider as he turned to Shalou. "Cell's perfect form has a quantifiable power level now," he explained. "But Boros, he's on another scale altogether. No current energy metrics can measure him." Cell's voice echoed with fierce conviction. "I don't care. If I attain perfection, Boros won't stand a chance." The insectoid warrior leaned forward, every sinew tensed as if ready to spring. Becoming the ultimate being was Cell's singular ambition, his only path to shatter every limit and prove his supremacy over all life. Shalou exchanged uneasy glances with the others. "Then why haven't you done it already?" he asked. Ethan stepped out of the shadows. His expression was calm, almost amused. "If Cell wants to reach perfection, he needs to absorb androids 17 and 18, just like in the future timeline. But they're guarded there. You can't just send him to snatch them." Shalou frowned. "So what are you suggesting?" "It's simple," Ethan said. He folded his arms, his eyes bright. "In one possible future, Cell does become perfect. All I have to do is pull that future forward and make it happen right now." A hush fell over the lab. Dr. Gro's eyebrows shot up. "You can bend timelines?" Ethan nodded. "I can bring that future into the present. Give Cell the chance to absorb 17 and 18 before they're prepared for him, and unleash his perfect form today." Cell's mandibles clicked in anticipation. "Then let's begin." As the monitors flickered and the air crackled with temporal energy, every researcher braced for what came next. The dawn of Cell's true perfection, brought into being by Ethan's extraordinary gift. Chapter 1084, Complete Cell versus Super Boros. As Ethan spoke, he slowly lifted his right hand, palm turned skyward. An indescribable wave of energy began to emanate from him. No ordinary power, but an infinite force that transcended any single universe. It was deep and intricate, like a cosmic black hole pulling in all that surrounded it, concealing secrets beyond comprehension. This power reached out to the very threads of the multiverse's timeline, threatening even to rewrite the history of existence. In an instant, the arena trembled under that invisible grip. Time itself seemed to waver, moments stretching and collapsing in unpredictable rhythms, and space twisted in on itself. A strange, shimmering aura filled the air, bending light into wavering patterns that danced like wounded fireflies. Cell staggered under the onslaught. His mind drifted, as though caught in an endless vortex, and the world around him blurred into obscurity. Yet deep within, he felt the fierce pulse of life raging through his cells, desperate to resist this overpowering force. Simultaneously, his genetic code began to reorganize at an unprecedented pace, striving to adapt to and survive Ethan's overwhelming power. Ethan drove his power to its limit, forcibly accelerating the evolutionary sequence that normally needed exact conditions to trigger. Within Cell, a hidden force seemed to ignite, his cells trembling, then fracturing and fusing in an impossibly rapid cycle. In mere moments, billions of cells rewrote their own genetic instructions, not just reshaping his body, but rebuilding him at the molecular level into a new, far stronger life form. Standing nearby, androids number 17 and number 18 watched in shock as their own energies surged. It was as if an invisible tether had yanked at their power cores, pulling them into resonance with Cell's transformation. Yet this was no ordinary energy bleed. It was a profound exchange, an otherworldly communion that bent the rules of physics. In that tense instant, they sensed something vast and unfathomable linking them to Cell, to Ethan, and even to the cosmos itself. Awe and terror warred in their hearts. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the column of light collapsed inward and vanished. When the brilliance dimmed, Cell re-emerged in the real world, but he was unrecognizable. His form brimmed with a fresh, crackling power, and his eyes glowed with intent. In that charged silence, it was clear. Cell's evolution was complete, and the balance of the battle had irrevocably shifted. Cell's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. His muscles rippled into sleek, powerful lines, every fiber of his skin brimming with unyielding strength and vitality. He had become the embodiment of the perfect Cell, a living testament to the pinnacle of life itself. With each breath, the air seemed to quiver, as though even the atmosphere acknowledged his newfound supremacy. Cell stared down at his changed body, disbelief etched across his features. He flexed an arm, watching the surge of power pulse through his veins. He moved, swiftly, almost effortlessly, and marveled at how every motion felt sharper, faster, more precise than ever before. A roaring tide of life force flooded through him, nourishing his cells in ways he had never imagined possible. This is incredible, Cell whispered, voice trembling with awe. Words failed him. He could only stand there, awestruck, as if reborn into a wholly new existence. Ethan watched him with calm satisfaction, a faint smile playing at his lips. "As you can see, Cell," he said, his tone measured and confident, "I used my power to transcend time's limits and intervene directly in your evolution. Now you truly are perfect." A hush fell over the onlookers. Perfect Cell, no one could deny it now. Ethan barely exerted himself, yet the results were astonishing. He accomplished in moments what would ordinarily take tremendous effort. In truth, all he did was manipulate the threads of time and space, expending less energy than Perfect Cell's first form ever could. And this Perfect Cell B, for him, was already leagues beyond the version from the original timeline. Having skirted the edge of death and resurrected, his core strength had grown even more potent upon achieving his perfected body. Ethan met Cell's gaze. "All right, Cell, show me what you just promised." He felt a twinge of embarrassment, recalling how Cell had resorted to self-destruction the last time he ran out of reserves. But then again, Ethan had been the one to refine and empower him into this perfected state, so he wasn't about to judge. Besides, Cell's psyche was a tangled tapestry of Saiyan ferocity, Namekian resolve, Frieza clan ruthlessness, and more. Hardly any original will remain to criticize. With a low, determined growl, Cell clenched his fists. "I will prove that I am the strongest." He turned his attention to the towering figure standing opposite him, Boros. But this was no mere space conqueror from the old stories. Dr. Garrow's relentless tinkering had fused alien technology and bioengineering with Boros's already fearsome power, creating something one might dub Super Boros, or more fittingly, Perfect Boros. The arena crackled with anticipation as these two superlative warriors prepared to clash. Ethan watched quietly, every fiber of his being ready for the spectacle about to unfold. Boros stood motionless, the emblem of the Galactic Empire gleaming on the left side of his chest. His face betrayed no hint of feeling, only the faint mechanical whir of servo motors. "Boros," Dr. Garrow's voice crackled over the intercom, "show him what you're capable of." Under Ethan's orders, Dr. Garrow had further suppressed any emotional response in his androids. Boros possessed nothing but cool, unerring logic, calm, efficient, and utterly obedient. In Jarrow's eyes, that unemotional obedience made Boros the perfect fighting machine. Across the desolate arena, Cell's reptilian eyes glittered with anticipation. He had achieved the flawless form he'd pursued for so long, a sculpted exoskeleton of biometal, sinews rippling beneath immaculately designed muscle fibers, every centimeter of his skin humming with raw, untapped energy. Today he would test the limits of that power, and Boros would be the ideal subject. With a roar of excitement, Cell lunged forward. His fist, roiling with gale-force wind pressure, sliced the air. "Let's see what you've got," he snarled. In the same instant, Boros shifted his weight, extending one steel-hard hand. Underneath the thunderous force, Boros's fingers closed around Cell's charging fist and held fast. The collision sent a shockwave rippling outward, tearing up the cracked concrete beneath their feet. Yet Boros's grip never wavered, an unspoken testament to his unyielding obedience and the clinical perfection of his design. Cell's eyes widened in surprise, and for the first time, this ultimate predator tasted something close to uncertainty. Boros's palm shone with an unseen force, gripping Cell so tightly he couldn't break free. Cell didn't hesitate. He shifted his stance in an instant and drove a powerful sidekick straight for Boros's forehead, an impact that would have staggered anyone, even a warrior of Boros's stature. But Boros was ready. With uncanny precision, He brought his other arm down in an angled elbow strike, meeting Cell's kick head-on. The collision unleashed a deafening roar, rending the air itself. Ethan refused to accept defeat. Before his clenched fist could even land, Boros's other hand shot out, striking Ethan's jaw with a crack. But Boros had anticipated the move. Twisting aside, he followed through with a perfectly aimed kick to Ethan's midsection. Even without human organs to damage, the blow drove a shock of pain through Ethan's core, throwing him off balance. He staggered forward. Only Boros's firm grip on his wrist prevented him from crashing to the ground. "Damn it!" Ethan growled, pain and indignation fueling him. He was one of the universe's mightiest beings. He couldn't and wouldn't lose here. Summoning every ounce of his power, he drew in a lungful of air. Inside him, each cell seemed to ignite, flooding his body with raw energy. His aura flared, rolling outward in waves of incandescent light. Steeling his resolve, Ethan raised his right hand. The air around him rippled as he prepared to unleash his full force, an unstoppable counterstrike that would settle the fight once and for all. Ethan narrowed his focus, and in an instant, a brilliant wave of golden energy erupted from his palm, blinding and searing, like the first light of dawn unleashed in a single strike. Boros didn't flinch. He thrust his right hand forward, summoning a swirling vortex of deep blue power that churned in his palm like a storm-tossed sea, swallowing every flicker of light around it. The two beams shot toward one another, meeting just inches apart with an earth-shaking roar that seemed to crack the very air. Muscles coiled and veins bulged on both warriors as they slotted palms, each pouring every ounce of strength into the collision. Under the titanic pressure of opposing forces, the beams finally shattered in a cataclysmic explosion, an eruption of blinding light and raging winds that tore the surrounding atmosphere into shards and bent space itself under the onslaught. The shockwave from the explosion ripped through the battlefield like a raging tempest, uprooting trees and pulverizing boulders. Yet amid that cataclysmic force, Boros stood unmoved, his form steady, as if cradled by an unseen barrier. Using the churning dust and smoke for cover, he struck. His right hand vanished into the haze and seized Cell's wrist with unerring precision. Cell's fingers dug into Boros's arm, but he felt instantly shackled. Every muscle seemed predicted, every movement locked down. His face drained of color, and cold sweat beaded on his brow, but he refused to yield. With a roar, he drove his legs into the ground and launched them both skyward. High above the scarred earth, their limbs slashed and collided. Each impact rang out like twin mountains crashing together, each strike a desperate bid for dominance, as though two savage beasts fought tooth and claw for survival. The very air between them seemed to tear apart under the weight of their power, visible rifts flickering like lightning. Cell refused to back down. Summoning every ounce of will, he fired a concentrated beam of energy straight from his eye sockets, aiming squarely at Boros's face, an unexpected strike meant to catch his opponent off guard. Cell braced himself, confident that at the very least he would force Boros on the defensive. Instead, Boros reacted with terrifying calm. At the last instant before impact, he snapped his single eye shut. The thin lids, hard as cosmic steel, absorbed the blast, deflecting it into a shower of starlight that scattered into the void. A mocking smile curved Boros's lips, a silent declaration of his invulnerability. Then, with chilling intensity, Boros's eye opened again, blazing with an inner fire that threatened to consume everything in its path. At the same time, the jewel-like eye embedded in his chest ignited in a brilliant sapphire glow, as if it could banish the blackest darkness and set the universe itself ablaze. As Boros's lone eye flared to life, the jet-black lines etched across his body awakened in response. They glowed with an electric blue light that pulsed in time with the eye, snaking across his massive form like living currents. These luminous veins wound through his muscles and bones, infusing him with power he had never felt before. Every fiber in Boros's body coiled like a beast on the verge of breaking free, ready to unleash unimaginable force. "Trash cannon!" he roared, channeling that surging energy through the single eye on his chest. In an instant, a titanic beam of power erupted, roaring outward like a tidal wave aimed directly at Cell. Boros himself had dubbed the technique his small fry cannon, since even the hardiest foes would be obliterated by its sheer intensity. Cell's eyes widened with alarm as the blast bore down on him. He strained with every ounce of strength, trying to wrench his wrists free from Boros's iron grip. But Boros held him as if his fingers were forged from steel. Despair flickered across Cell's face, but he refused to give in. Summoning all his remaining energy, he poured a fierce counterforce into his clenched fists, bracing himself to meet the onslaught head-on. Boros's cannon was overwhelmingly powerful. Cell's defense proved as futile as a mantis standing before a charging chariot. In an instant, his barrier shattered, and the blast swept over him like a merciless tsunami. He felt every fiber of his being rent apart, as if the attack threatened to swallow even his soul. Then, at the brink of annihilation, something deep within Cell surged. A volcanic eruption of energy burst forth, colliding with Boros's cannon and instantly overwhelming it. With that titanic outpouring, a massive protective sphere blossomed around Cell, expanding outward in a dome hundreds of meters across. Inside, the lingering shock of Boros's blast was sealed away. The shield's surface shimmered with incandescent light, the radiance of countless interlocking energy particles forging an unbreakable barrier. The force of that counterattack flung Boros's body through the sky like a kite with a severed tether. He arced high above the battlefield before crashing in a thunderous impact against a distant mountainside. Silence followed, broken only by the distant rumble of rock and the faint hum of Cell's newly awakened power. Chapter 1086, Boros Crushes. The mountainside wall exploded under the force of Boros's blow, sending rock and dust cascading in every direction. When the cloud of debris cleared, Boros stood unharmed amid the wreckage. Opposite him, Cell's shimmering protective barrier dissolved, revealing a battered form. His chest rose and fell in ragged gasps, each inhalation accompanied by a harsh wheeze. Even after absorbing 2 artificial humans, and in theory gaining access to 2 limitless energy cores, Cell's reserves were far from infinite. He still needed senzu beans to recover fully. Seizing the moment, Ethan leapt into action. Though he hadn't literally absorbed the artificial humans' power, his attack mirrored their devastating force. A shockwave erupted from his strike, slamming into Boros's flank with bone-shaking intensity, yet Boros barely staggered. Cell's bloodshot eyes locked onto Boros, burning with equal parts fury and disbelief. He refused to accept that he had become a relic, an outdated being eclipsed by a mightier opponent. In his mind, the perfect form was meant to be the universe's supreme being, flawless, unbeatable, eternal. But here and now, before Boros's overwhelming strength, all of Cell's convictions lay shattered. Boros tore through the night sky like a bolt of lightning, shattering the stillness of space the moment he appeared before Cell. A crushing pressure radiated from him, the sheer force of his ki making distant stars shiver. His fist, shrouded in a pale blue aura of concentrated energy, moved so fast it outpaced the speed of light itself. To the naked eye, each strike was nothing more than a blur with silver streaks, like a fleeting meteor blazing across the heavens. When his gauntlet sliced through the air, it unleashed a deafening sonic boom, an echo beyond human hearing that seemed to shake the universe. Beneath his thunderous wind, air molecules compressed so violently that a circular shockwave formed around his fist, rippling outward in all directions. Everything in its path was obliterated. Grass, trees, even the earth itself ripped apart as a roar of displaced air billowed outward in concentric shockwaves. Without the slightest hesitation, Boros struck Cell with a single planet-shaking blow. The speed of his fist alone was astonishing, tens of thousands of times the speed of sound, yet its true terror lay in its raw power, the kind of force barely conceivable by human standards. Boros's fist hurtled toward Cell like a blazing meteor, its energy enough to reshape the terrain upon impact. The instant it connected with Cell's supposedly impervious skin, the surrounding air ignited in a blinding flare. In that split second, the punch ripped through the outer layers of Cell's body, shredding tissue, blood vessels, muscle, and even bone like fragile parchment. The tremendous heat liberated by the strike could have melted steel, but Cell required no invitation. His own flesh disintegrated under the assault, scattering microscopic fragments in a violent spray. Still unrelenting, Boros's fist drove ever deeper, crushing everything in its path with unstoppable might. What remained of Cell's defenses simply crumbled, torn away by the brutal onslaught, until there was nothing left to resist. Boros's gargantuan fist slammed into Cell's midsection like a battering ram. Inside, Cell's organs were crushed and liquefied into a searing hot plasma that sprayed outward in a crimson arc. It felt as though an invisible hand were tearing him apart from within. Cell's face twisted in shock and agony, but there was no way to halt the devastation overtaking him. A strangled cry escaped Cell as his body convulsed, each spasm the last protest of organs under unbearable compression. Boros's fists sank even deeper. Warm fluid and fragments of tissue spurted from Cell's mouth, filling the air with the metallic tang of blood. Still, Boros did not relent. His free hand cracked down in perfect synchrony with the first, each blow striking with the force of a miniature nuclear blast. Every impact unleashed a shockwave so potent it rent the very fabric of space around them. Energy ripples shimmered outward, obliterating everything in their path, leaving nothing but void. Cell's scream faded to a gurgle as Boros's relentless assault ground him to dust. When the onslaught finally ceased, the battlefield lay silent, bathed in the eerie glow of dissipating energy. Where Cell once stood, nothing remained. Battered by Boros's relentless onslaught, Cell was sent hurtling through the air again and again. Each collision rang out like thunder, accompanied by his agonized groans. He spun in wild arcs, no more controlled than a leaf caught in a hurricane, before crashing back down. His defenses, once formidable, now seemed paper-thin against Boros's overwhelming power, ready to shatter at any moment. Every blow Boros delivered felt like the fury of nature itself, ripping the ground apart. Trees were uprooted in a single sweep of his fist, flung skyward before slamming back down with a dull, earth-shaking thud. Cracks spidered across the battlefield, yawning scars in the broken earth. Distant peaks crumbled under the shockwaves, sending a cascade of rubble and dust into the air. What had been a serene mountain valley was now a wasteland of shattered rock. The air stung with the acrid tang of superheated destruction. Wherever Boros's fists met air, they left smudges of black, evidence of molecules igniting under the fierce heat. Flames licked at the edges of the battlefield, and every breath tasted of burning ozone as Cell, bruised and battered, fought to stay on his feet against the unstoppable tide of devastation. Black streaks scarred the sky, turning the battlefield into a wasteland that looked as if doomsday itself had left its mark. Every trace of life and vitality was gone. In the center of the ruin, Cell stood battered and bleeding from Boros's relentless onslaught. His skin was torn, muscles exposed, and each collision sent the crack of his bones echoing across the empty plain. The arrogance that once gleamed in his eyes had vanished, replaced now by abject fear and despair. Ethan watched thoughtfully from a distance. Boros's energy jets weren't merely weapons, they generated propulsion too, a modification clearly devised by Dr. Garrow. With each burst of thrust, Boros moved as fast as a meteor, perhaps faster. A creature capable of sublight speed in its normal state, his assaults were simply beyond the tracking ability of Dragon Ball's greatest warriors. No matter how powerful they might be, they stood little chance against an enemy who could strike before they even had time to react. Boros's speed and strength surpassed anything the Dragon Ball masters could have imagined or reacted to. Chapter 1087. A chance to kidnap Majin Buu, and the god of destruction Cell screamed as Boros's blow sent him hurtling through the air. His body traced a long, brutal arc, flattening dozens of mountain peaks like they were nothing more than fragile tofu. In an instant, entire summits were leveled, gravel and dust cascading down their flanks. Finally, Cell's battered form crashed into a mountainside and lay still. But Boros offered no mercy. The single, glowing eye on his chest flared again, his signal that a new assault was about to begin. He raised his arm and unleashed the fishbone cannon once more. A blinding ribbon of cerulean and violet energy tore into the sky, twisting and coiling like a furious dragon as it zeroed in on the mountain where Cell was buried. When the beam struck, there was no thunderous explosion. Instead, in the blink of an eye, billions of tons of earth and rock were vaporized. The mountainside became riddled with cavities, as if carved by countless invisible blades, leaving nothing but a scarred, cratered ruin. Steam curled upward from the blasted earth, intertwining with dust and debris to form a roiling gray mist. Boros had spared him, Dr. Garrow's orders had never called for total annihilation. Cell lay battered and bleeding at the bottom of a massive crater, the result of a cannon blast that had vaporized an entire mountainside. Yet even in his critically wounded state, Cell's body was slowly regenerating. His healing surpassed Piccolo's. Where Piccolo's recovery drained vast reserves of energy, Cell could revive again and again. Thanks to that resilience, he had skirted death multiple times, though he still hadn't triggered the Saiyan passive ability. Otherwise, surviving Vegeta's full-strength assault or Sun Wukong's Kamehameha from chest-toes would have activated it for sure. At last, Cell's wounds sealed shut. He staggered to his feet, gasping for breath. Boros watched him in silence, his expression unreadable. Cell bowed his head, acknowledging the yawning gap between them, and chose not to challenge Boros further. Ethan watched Cell bristle in silence, then allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "So you've finally accepted that you're not a perfect existence," he said coolly. The future Android 17, a lean, battle-scarred version, couldn't resist a taunt. "Spare me the lecture. I'm still leagues above you." Cell's cold eyes narrowed. "Oh, really?" In the main timeline, the present-day Android 17 frowned at his counterpart's insolence. Cell looked from 117 to the other, then at the pair of Android 18 standing by. He'd known Ethan was powerful, but this bizarre merging of timelines had turned Cell into Ethan's pawn. Ethan leaned back, enjoying the spectacle. The once unshakable Cell had been humbled, forced to bow to Ethan's strategy. Yet defeat did not extinguish Cell's promise. He carried Frieza's genetic code, and if Frieza could forge himself into Golden Frieza through sheer will, why couldn't Cell achieve a Golden Cell? Perhaps even a Super Saiyan Cell lay in his future. And Boros? Ethan mused, glancing at the hybrid conqueror he'd recently absorbed. With training, he'll only grow stronger. Turning away, Ethan gathered the 4 androids under his control. He left behind Dr. Garrow's Super Boros. His reserves of power were ample, but he craved something more unpredictable. In time, another Majin Buu would emerge. 2 Buus, Fat Buu and Kid Buu, would be all the forces Ethan needed to dominate every timeline. With his android legion in tow and the promise of Majin minions yet to come, Ethan's ascendancy was only just beginning. Ethan's gaze swept over the sprawling skyline before him. Towering skyscrapers of gleaming steel and glass rose side by side with ancient oaks, their branches twisting through sky bridges and beneath floating vehicles. Behind him stood Cell and the future versions of Android 17 and 18, pulled across dimensions by Ethan's power. The 3 newcomers took it all in, eyes wide with awe and confusion. Cell's voice was the first to break the silence. "Where are we? Is this another universe?" Ethan nodded, stepping forward. "Exactly. Welcome to the Marvel Universe, my domain." Android 17 and 18 exchanged a knowing look. They remembered Ethan's promise before the dimensional jump. They were traveling to a world unlike their own. Now, seeing this seamless blend of nature and technology, they understood just how different it was. Cell's expression shifted from disbelief to fascination. He pointed at a cluster of airborne commuters zipping past a crystalline tower. "All of this exists alongside nature?" Ethan produced a sleek, wrist-worn projector. With a flick, a holographic map bloomed between them, countless galaxies and branching timelines. "The multiverse," he explained gently. "Countless realities, each one unique, like droplets scattered across an endless sea." As Ethan spoke, his mind raced ahead to his true mission. If Super Boros could be trained to his fullest potential, he stood a chance not only to protect Dr. Garrow, but also to take down Majin Buu once and for all. To do that, he needed allies, and here they were. A bio-engineered warrior, and 2 state-of-the-art androids from a future that still haunted him. Cell leaned forward, eyes narrowing with interest. "So you brought us here to fight alongside you?" Ethan closed the projector with a decisive snap. "Precisely. Together, we'll hone Super Boros' power, safeguard Jiro, and face Buu. Welcome to my world, and to the first step of our plan." Behind them, the hum of the Marvel Universe carried on, its possibilities as vast as the multiverse itself. And in that moment, an unlikely alliance was born. Ethan's gaze swept over the trio before him. "Your home universe may be mighty, but its number of truly powerful beings is small compared to what you'll find here. You'll face challenges you've never imagined, and encounter strength beyond anything you've seen. Never assume you're the pinnacle of power. there will always be someone stronger. Cell's brow furrowed as his mind raced back to Boros. Then Boros? He's the strongest here? Ethan shook his head. Not at all. Boros is a cosmic overlord in his own universe, much like you two are in yours. He pledged loyalty to me, but even he isn't among the foremost here. In this universe, there are far greater forces at play. Cell exchanged a look with Android 17 and Android 18. Even these two, androids designed for battle, sensed the weight behind Ethan's words. Recruiting cosmic overlords from other realities as mere subordinates spoke to a level of authority and power they couldn't yet fathom. A heavy silence settled over the group. The air itself seemed to thrum with unspoken tension. At last, Ethan broke it with a sweeping gesture. Come, I want you to meet the native champions of this universe. In the distance, two figures materialized, Dugian, and beside him his uncanny copy, Kelphead Dugian. Their presence crackled with raw energy so intense it made Cell's circuits hum and the android's processors whirl. Ethan offered a small, confident smile. These two are only the beginning. Chapter 10: The Proliferation of the Dugian. Across the vast expanse of the Galactic Empire, the Dugian race has begun to multiply at an unprecedented rate. Only two bloodlines remain purebred, the original Dugian and the Kelphead Dugian. All other variants are mixed-blood hybrids. Adding to this roster are Boros' Cyclopean descendants and the golden human army that Ethan cloned in tribute to Saitama's legendary power. On the surface, these warriors resemble supermodels, tall, lithe, and impossibly handsome. Yet beneath those striking exteriors lies a fighting force so overwhelming that in most encounters, they stand unrivaled against universe-level deities. But sheer numbers have their weakness. When a legion of Dugian faced Ego, their numerical advantage counted for nothing, just as it nearly did for Android 18 before her. Against mechanical monsters whose power is governed by immutable cosmic laws, quantity can become a fatal liability. Ethan has conceived a daring solution: summon a true god of destruction. The destructive energy of such a being functions like a fundamental cosmic rule, an unstoppable mechanism that simply does not exist in the Marvel Universe. One devastating strike could erase entire armies before they even know what hit them. This isn't pure theory. In a one-on-one duel, Cell bested a Dugian warrior, but the Dugian did not perish. Even more startling was the display from the Cyclopean lineage, a hidden power so extraordinary that it left Cell genuinely astonished. With conventional might proving insufficient, Ethan now sets his sights on cosmic antiquity. If he can harness a god of destruction's cataclysmic force, the Empire's enemies may be crushed at the speed of thought, never even given the chance to draw their weapons. Though it wasn't as powerful as Boros, it still shouldn't be underestimated. Chapter 1088. Little Cell surveyed the ranks of the Galactic Empire with calculating eyes, fully aware of his own limitations. Ever since Ethan had imported clones of General Zod and an elite squad of Kryptonians into the Empire's service, the roster of formidable opponents had swollen to dizzying heights. On any given day, half a dozen warriors could match his power in a sparring bout. But that only meant they could stand toe-to-toe, not that they could win. If Cell ever unleashed his full might, he could annihilate 99% of them in an instant. He recalled his encounters on the battlefield, how he'd toyed with mighty combatants like Vegeta, matching their blows with effortless precision. When he switched to full power, it took him mere seconds to crush them. His miniature Cell clones swarmed over every weakness until nothing remained. Yet the Empire's strength no longer depended on a handful of super soldiers. From corner to corner of the galaxy, champions rose up, warriors tempered in the farthest systems, each one a potential threat to his supremacy. And above them all sat the Supreme Emperor, a ruler so potent his very name inspired awe. Cell allowed himself a wry chuckle. Even amid such prodigious talent, he knew he would emerge victorious the moment he committed himself to the fight. His grin widened as he flexed his fingers, imagining how Little Cell, his pinging horde of self-replicating minions, would shatter their defenses down to dust. Still, he forced himself to temper that confidence with caution. Arrogance, he reminded himself, had been the downfall of greater beings than any Kryptonian. With one last composed breath, Cell turned away from the glittering parade of challengers, resolved to maintain the razor's edge between boldness and hubris. The Galactic Empire rests on an ancient foundation, and at its pinnacle sits an emperor whose mysteries run deeper than the void between the stars. To survive and thrive in this ceaseless struggle for dominance, one must never stop evolving. When I first achieved my complete form, I, Cell, believed there was nowhere left to go. Then Ethan pulled me aside and said, "Strength isn't just granted, it's earned through discipline." It made sense. If the Emperor himself constantly sharpens his mind and body, why shouldn't I? So I began a relentless regimen of training, pushing my limits, refining every motion, mastering every surge of power. Still, the Empire does not sustain warriors who idle. Soon enough, a new assignment arrived on my holo display. Scrolling through my orders, one mission title blazed across the screen: Operation Cosmic Cockroach Cleanup. The briefing painted a grim picture. These cosmic cockroaches are swarms of microscopic beings that devour energy and matter. Alone, each is weak. Together, they are a plague. Their reproductive rate defies logic, and they gather relentlessly along key hyperspace routes, endangering every vessel that passes. Like a cancer at the edge of imperial space, they gnaw away at our borders, and if left unchecked, they could disrupt the flow of supplies, troops, even strategic fleets. I frowned as the data scrolled past schematics and infestation maps. I had never pictured an interstellar empire of this scale grappling with something so mundane. Yet here we were, tasked with stamping out this creeping threat. Ethan met my gaze. His expression was steady, purposeful. "This is where your new strength will be tested," he said. "These creatures may be small, but they won't be easy to eradicate. Ready yourself." I activated my armor's power core and nodded. The Emperor demands perfection, and I intend to deliver, beginning with Operation Cosmic Cockroach Cleanup. These assignments may seem trivial, but they're actually vital to the safety and stability of the Galactic Empire. Even so, for someone as powerful as Cell, it feels like a colossal waste of time to be hunting down low-level creatures in person. "What a joke," he muttered, scowling at the mission briefing before him. On the holoprojector floated a Thetsep, three-dimensional model of the so-called cosmic spawning organism, accompanied by a data readout. Individually, these creatures were weak, barely more than nuisances. But in sufficient numbers, they could become a serious threat. Cell suppressed a sigh. There were plenty of formidable warriors scattered across the Empire, but very few who could actually operate in the void of space. The Milky Way was vast. True heavyweights were like drops in the ocean. "These menial tasks are really getting old," he grumbled, closing the briefing and rising to his full height. Duty-bound, he knew he must carry them out. But deep down, he could not hide his contempt for assignments so beneath his abilities. Still, an agent of the Empire never shirks his responsibilities, no matter how trivial they may seem. Ethan didn't want to waste his time on these weaklings. What he craved was a real fight against a formidable opponent. Just as he hesitated, a spark of inspiration struck. He pivoted gracefully, swished his tail once, and seemed to draw power into its tip. A low hum filled the air, and then 7 pocket-sized versions of himself shot forth and landed at his feet. Each miniature Ethan mirrored him perfectly, diminished in size but brimming with the same cunning and fighting spirit in their gleaming eyes. Created by his cell division ability, they carried fragments of his strength and intellect. Though small, they were neither fragile nor simple-minded. They could execute his techniques flawlessly, learn on the fly, and adapt to any combat situation. In every respect, they were little Ethans, complete with their own spark of personality. "Deal with these nuisances," Ethan said with a playful grin, sending his tiny duplicates into the fray. "These small clones are more than enough to handle those cosmic-spawned creatures, and since they're literally fragments of Ethan himself, they obey his every command without hesitation." At this moment, the Galactic Empire's appointed liaison for all of Ethan's affairs stands at his side, studying the tiny warriors with clear bewilderment. He is a Sharpet, one of the insectoid humanoid races that only recently threw in their lot with the Empire. His head resembles that of a praying mantis, crowned by 2 sharp compound eyes and equipped with powerful scythe-like forelimbs. The rest of his torso is a curious fusion of human and spider, supported by 8 slender, jointed legs that lend him surprising agility despite his broad frame. The Sharpets typify the Empire's rapid expansion. Founded only a few years ago, the Galactic Empire is still young compared to the three great powers of the universe. But its military might has grown so formidable that it now stands on equal footing with, and in some respects even above, those ancient regimes. 99% of its member races have joined since its inception, making the Sharpets far from unique among the Empire's newest recruits. Their physical form blends the lithe poise of a mantis with the fluid agility of a spider. Chitinous plates armor their limbs and torso, while multifaceted eyes glint with a razor-sharp intelligence. Though no human features remain, their sensory acuity surpasses that of ordinary beings. They detect the slightest tremor in the air, the faintest shift in energy. Sharpet Affairs Officer Zark regards Ethan with equal measures of awe and curiosity. Ethan may not belong to the Sharpet ranks, but his insectoid traits awaken in Zark an inexplicable sense of kinship. To Zark, the sleek contours of an exoskeleton and the crystalline facets of compound eyes are nature's highest form of beauty, an artistry that transcends flesh and bone. In Ethan's fusion of human and insect elements, Zark sees not alien otherness, but a commanding elegance. Mr. Ethan, are these? Zark's question trails off, his voice tinged with both reverence and uncertainty. As one of the Sharpet's leading officers, he was handpicked for his keen observational skills and unflinching efficiency. Imperial High Command has tasked him with supervising and facilitating Ethan's ongoing assignments throughout the Galactic Empire. Ethan stood there, puzzled by Cell's sudden creation of those tiny cells. He couldn't help but wonder what purpose they served and what power they might wield. Chapter 1089. Cell begins his cleaning job. Cell's lips curved into a faint smile, one that spoke of endless depths and absolute confidence. "These," he said, gesturing toward the tiny creatures, "are my children. I created them myself through cell division." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Don't let their size fool you. Each one has inherited a fragment of my power and intelligence, more than enough to take on those cosmic breeding organisms." Across from him, Zark's compound eyes shimmered with surprise. Almost at once, he masked the reaction and inclined his head in acknowledgement. Quietly, he resolved to keep a close watch on these miniature cells to gauge just how formidable they truly were. "I understand, Mr. Cell," Zarke replied, the light in his multifaceted eyes betraying the swift calculations racing through his mind. "I'll immediately marshal all the resources and support they need to guarantee this mission runs without a hitch," Zarke announced. As the Galactic Empire's affairs officer assigned to Cell, it was his responsibility not only to handle Cell's day-to-day needs, but also to ensure every one of Cell's strategies was carried out with the utmost efficiency. "Mr. Cell, you have nothing to worry about," Zarke continued. "I'll work hand in hand with you so that these little cells can deliver their greatest service to the Empire." With that, he commissioned a starship to convey the cells to their designated sector, a chain of 100 resource worlds scattered along the Milky Way's distant rim. Though far from the galactic core, each planet teemed with valuable materials, rare metals, exotic energy deposits, and other naturally occurring substances the Empire's matter synthesis tech could not fully replicate. These untamed resources held the secrets of the universe's birth and carried immense promise for scientific discovery and technological advancement. Now, however, extracting them would be a monumental undertaking. Around the resource-rich worlds, countless cosmic brood lie in wait, so pervasive and resilient that explorers have come to call them the cockroaches of the universe. Their forms vary beyond imagination. Some creep like pools of obsidian slime, slipping through the tiniest fissures in a ship's hull. Others rise as gigantic spheres, each composed of innumerable crystalline shards that flicker with unpredictable energy, like ticking bombs poised to detonate. There are varieties that scuttle and swarm like oversized insects, striking with astonishing speed and coordination. Still others defy even the boldest attempts at description, their outlines so bizarre that human language falters at capturing them. What unites every breed of these cosmic spawners is their appallingly rapid reproduction and voracious appetite. Matter and energy alike vanish into their gaping maws. The moment a resource planet is detected, they converge with ruthless efficiency, drawn like sharks to blood. quickly forming an impenetrable barrier that chokes off any hope of approach. As their numbers continue to surge, so too does their destructive power, now great enough to upset the planet's entire ecological balance, even threaten its very existence. The Department of Administration, the agency charged with monitoring and safeguarding the galaxy's frontier, immediately activated its highest-level emergency protocol upon receiving this news. Deploying the most advanced computational systems available, they ran precise simulations to estimate just how many of these cosmic spawning bodies were out there. The results were staggering. At least tens of trillions of these entities lurking across the 100 resource-rich planets under observation. Such an astronomical figure defies comprehension, even for scientists accustomed to dealing in astronomical numbers. It also means that the slightest lapse in vigilance could trigger a planetary-scale catastrophe. In the face of this colossal threat, the conventional forces of the Galactic Empire looked woefully ill-equipped, no more effective than a swarm of ants trying to topple a mountain. Chapter 12. The Cleansing Squadrons. Ethan sat in the command chair of the flagship Perseus, his gaze fixed on the hollow schematic hovering before him. Out there, the so-called cosmic spawns were massing in the void, nightmarish entities that ate energy and raw matter the way biological viruses devour antibiotics. No conventional bombardment could kill them. Every missile, beam cannon, or orbital strike they'd thrown merely slowed them down for a moment. Our supply lines can't support full-scale fleets, Ethan murmured, tapping a datapad. And these things adapt faster than any superweapon we've got. We need a new plan. Across the coalition, the galaxy's greatest warriors had already been pressed into service as cleaners. Kryptonian war regiments in silver dreadnoughts, the master swordsmen of the Blade clans, even the Cyclopean Star Alliance, each had taken turns sweeping through infected sectors. Yet the cosmic spawns shrugged off planet-cracking attacks as if they were minor irritations. Then came Project Little Cell. Developed from the genetic template of Frieza's bloodline, the Little Cells were more than mere bioweapons. Each was a self-contained reactor, an intelligent, mobile powerhouse designed to consume and neutralize the cosmic spawns at the molecular level. Able to survive in the harshest vacuum and accelerate to hypersonic speeds, they were exactly the scalpel the Coalition needed to excise this growing tumor from the galaxy. Ethan keyed the comm. All right, people. Activate containment fields and align the cell carriers at Sector Theta 9. Once the jamming arrays are up, we'll launch the cells directly into the spawn field's epicenter. A tense silence fell as auxiliary generators whined to life, rerouting power through the magnetic cages that held the little cells in stasis. Minutes felt like hours. Then every indicator on the main screen flipped green. Go, Ethan ordered. From the Perseus and its sister ships, dozens of sleek carriers detached. At a 10,000-kilometer standoff, each popped open its cargo bays. Bright bioluminescent orbs drifted into space, their carapaces pulsing with raw energy. In an instant, they rocketed off, trails of cerulean fire streaking through the darkness. Ethan watched, breath held. Onboard sensors immediately registered violent reactions within the spawn field. Microquakes, electromagnetic pulses, bursts of phosphorescent light. A moment later, the readings flatlined, every target reduced to inert residue. Report, Ethan barked. Cell Unit Alpha through Gamma. Successful, came the response. Units Delta and Epsilon, 100% neutralization, no bounce back. A triumphant chord of noise rose through the comm channels as each cell transmitted its final status. Phase complete. Quarantine secured. Ethan allowed himself a small nod. Excellent work. Stand down the jammers. Prep for the next target. As the carriers retracted and the fleet regrouped, Ethan leaned back, letting the calm after the storm wash over him. This victory would save countless worlds, but the galaxy was vast, and new threats always lurked beyond the last charted star. He tapped his console. Plot a course for the Vortigern cluster. There's chatter about another infestation. The hollow schematic dissolved, and a fresh star map appeared. Ethan's jaw set. The cleanse was far from over. But with the little cells unleashed and his coalition united, he would meet whatever cosmic horror came next, head on. Ethan and the others burst out of the ship, racing straight for the swarming cosmic spawners. The vessel's sudden arrival had already roused countless of these entities, and now they fixated on Little Cell as their primary prey. Ah! Little Cell let out a strange shriek. He thrust his palms forward and unleashed a blinding chi wave that tore through the stillness of space. Its raw, destructive force crackled outward in every direction. Infuriated by the energy surge, over 100 million cosmic spawners surged forward without hesitation, eager to feast on that pow. But before a single one could touch the wave, it struck. In an instant, each creature was obliterated, shredded into dust that scattered across the stars and vanished into the void. One blow had annihilated hundreds of millions of cosmic spawners. The sheer scale of destruction sent a thrill through everyone, but in the infinite expanse of the cosmos, this triumph was only the beginning. As more cosmic spawn poured in from every direction, drawn by some unseen force, the 7 little cells showed no hint of fear. In a blur of motion, they scattered, using their superior speed and strength to lure and distract the attackers. One of the cells spun gracefully through the air to dodge an incoming blow. Then, in an instant, it came to a stop, cupped its hands together, and summoned a roaring wave of energy. The crackling surge coiled through the sky like a giant dragon, and wherever it passed, the spawn were crushed to dust. Chapter 1090, Sharu solves the problem by bearing a child. The spaceship's sensors functioned like a single all-seeing eye, streaming real-time images back to the control center. What appeared on the main display was nothing short of extraordinary. Countless cosmic growth entities drifting together like plankton in an endless sea, filling every inch of space before them. Quickly, the command team activated the ship's advanced analysis suite. Numbers scrolled by at dizzying speed before the system finally froze on a figure that defied imagination. 11016. To put it in perspective, a billion was trivial, a trillion barely a drop, and yet this was orders of magnitude beyond even that. Describing such a quantity in kilometers was almost meaningless. Faced with this vast swarm, every individual aboard the ship felt inconsequential. Ethan and the 7 little cells shrank to the size of motes of dust against the backdrop of these cosmic leviathans. Worse still, they could sense an unmistakable aura of malice and greed emanating from the throng, as if the very life force of these growth bodies hungered for more. These cosmic proliferators spread through the universe like cockroaches, unbelievably resilient, able to multiply overnight. All they hungered for was the colossal energy stored within the cells, a power so immense it could obliterate entire planets. Driven by ravenous greed, they swarmed in a riotous onslaught. In the boundless void, where up and down, left and right meant nothing, they struck from every angle at once. The cells, caught completely off guard, stared in disbelief at the onrushing tide of creatures. They'd never faced anything like it, an overwhelming horde intent on devouring them. Every cell's eyes shone with fear and resolve. They knew that, in mere seconds, their survival would be decided. "Go to hell!" Ethan bellowed. He was one of the bravest among them, and now he sprang into action. Clasping his hands together, he tensed every muscle as a brilliant golden aura ignited around him, raw energy coiling like a primed volcano. Then, with a roar that echoed through the depths of space, he thrust his palms forward and unleashed a gargantuan Kamehameha wave. Ethan gathered every ounce of his chi and unleashed a titanic wave of energy that ripped through the galaxy. Wherever that golden radiance struck, the alien cosmic spawn instantly turned to ash, every cell vaporized, as though they'd never existed. In that moment, the once ink-black void shone like broad daylight, lit by the brilliance of Ethan's power. Yet even as stars trembled under the assault, the enemy's numbers did not falter. Hundreds of thousands, then millions, of those spawn poured in like grains of sand across an endless desert, surging from every direction, as if the universe itself were vomiting them forth. Their tide was relentless, threatening to swallow the cells and plunge the cosmos back into darkness. Refusing to yield, the tiny warriors known as the cells formed into rapid response teams. In seamless relay, each cell channeled its full might into a blistering Kamehameha wave, blasts so fierce they could obliterate Earth and Moon alike. With every pulse of golden light, more cosmic spawn disintegrated, but still the horde pressed on, an inexhaustible tide. At the very heart of the storm, Ethan stood firm. His eyes burned with resolve as he prepared to unleash yet another devastating wave of Qigong. No matter how vast the enemy or how dark the void, he vowed to hold the line and protect every last cell under his command. After the 7th mini-cell unleashed its Kamehameha wave, the first had already recovered and was ready to fire again. By alternating their attacks, they kept the cosmic spawn from ever closing the gap, reducing countless alien bodies to ash with each blast of ki. Still, the enemy numbers did not dwindle. The spawn poured in from every direction as if driven by boundless energy. At this rate, it'll take a full galactic month to clear this sector, Officer Zark reported. In the Galactic Empire's calendar, 50 days and 50-day months counted by its central star. That meant the cells would have to sustain the assault for 2,500 continuous hours before the region could be declared safe. Zark conveyed the grim calculation to Ethan, who was deep into his gravity training in the chamber. As the simulated G-forces pressed down on him, Ethan clenched his fists, determination burning in his eyes. Whatever it took, he vowed, they would finish this fight long before the last hour had passed. In the gravity chamber, the only light came from a handful of dim, blue, luminescent panels, just enough to trace Ethan's broad silhouette. Under the crushing force, his skin took on a weird, metallic sheen, and every breath felt like a battle against the invisible weight. "Is this going to take much longer?" he muttered, voice low. The update he'd just received confirmed his suspicion. Several key sectors were still uncleared. If they fell behind schedule, the entire Empire's offensive could stall. Over the past weeks of relentless gravity training, Ethan's power had surged to unprecedented levels, raw energy pulsing through his limbs, begging for release. He ached to leap into the fray himself. Then a plan crystallized in his mind. Why limit himself to a single warrior? His peculiar reproductive ability allowed him to spawn perfect miniature versions of himself, warriors who required only the Empire's boundless resources to recharge. With a small army of Ethan clones, the cleanup could be swift, efficient, and on-brand for the Empire's unstoppable advance. He focused his energy, and in a ripple of kinetic force, 10 identical figures snapped into existence around him, slender, hardened duplicates draped in the same armor. Ethan gave each clone a once-over, detecting no flaw in their replication. "Move out," he said, tone crisp with authority. The 10 new Ethans saluted crisply, then vanished down the corridor, ready to carry out his will. Ethan remained for a moment under the pale blue glow, letting the gravity press in one last time before he, too, headed for the front lines. Their strength now far outpaced that of the first 7 cells. After all, Cell himself had grown stronger. Zarke watched in stunned silence. He hadn't expected Cell to spawn offspring so effortlessly. At first, he'd assumed those initial 7 cells came from some rare reproductive phase, but now it was clear that Cell's ability to reproduce was beyond anything he'd imagined. Zarke found himself wondering whether this creature was some kind of cosmic queen, capable of generating tens of thousands of young at once. In truth, Cell could have done so, if it were willing to sacrifice vast amounts of its own biomass. Unlike the mythical queen Zark knew, which reproduced almost without cost, Cell needed to consume its own material for each newborn. Large-scale, rapid reproduction wasn't impossible, but it would be prohibitively costly, and Cell had no need for that many offspring. Instead, 17 cells united for the task, cutting the process down to a fraction of the time and swiftly eradicating countless cosmic breeding hosts. The cells carried out their tedious work flawlessly, without a single complaint. Ethan watched with satisfaction as Cell, compelled to bear children to resolve their dilemma, completed the task. "It looks like Cell has really mastered the cleaner's role," he said, a pleased smile spreading across his face. Chapter 1091, The Unscrupulous Father and His Child. Ethan stood at the edge of the laboratory, watching little Cell, barely over a year old, diligently monitor the eradication of breeding organisms across the galaxy. In the Galactic Empire, child labor was neither regulated nor forbidden, so no one batted an eye. Forcing an infant to toil while his father lounged at home and collected the profits was nothing short of ruthless. Clearing his throat, Ethan addressed his team. "Boss, Dr. Kinos, Agnes, how's the research coming along?" From behind a forest of blinking consoles and experimental apparatus, Boss peeked out, eyes gleaming with excitement. "Your Majesty, We've achieved a major breakthrough in our study of the cultivator specimen. Ethan nodded. The cultivator wasn't a Saiyan invention, but an alien life form the Saiyans had first encountered on a remote planet. Now, thanks to the Empire's resources, they were unraveling its secrets and perhaps unlocking a new, formidable weapon. Ethan leaned forward, absorbing every detail. Autonomous warriors were formidable on the battlefield, an invaluable asset, but the dragon fruit seeds used to create them were scarce and costly, placing them well beyond the reach of most commanders. Worse still, these bioengineered soldiers had notoriously volatile temperaments, prone to turning on their own side if not carefully controlled. Only the most trusted officers were ever allowed to command them. Though they possessed just enough intelligence to follow basic Saiyan or Frieza army orders, their use was surprisingly limited. After all, they vanished entirely by the time of the Namek campaign. Clearly, the Frieza forces had never fully embraced them. But Ethan wasn't here to discuss raw fighting power. That kind of strength, unstable as it was, held little interest for him. As your Majesty knows, the Grand Director murmured with a trace of regret, the autonomous warriors can devastate entire squads, yet their feral unpredictability remains their greatest liability. At that moment, however, his expression brightened and a glint of excitement lit his eyes. But after endless trial and error, I believe I've found a solution, one that could revolutionize our approach. By splicing Hulk DNA into the autonomous warrior genome, we might finally stabilize their power without sacrificing control. Ethan watched as the director's hands swept across a holoscreen, displaying pulsating diagrams of genetic sequences. I abandoned the old dragon fruit watering method entirely, he continued, voice low and eager, and now we're using pure Hulk blood to nourish each bio unit. The early results are encouraging. Have you seen the results? Behold our masterpiece, the Hulk cultivator. The boss's voice crackled with excitement as he beckoned Ethan forward. Under his outstretched hand stood a colossal figure of living green. Its rough, leaf-like hide rippled with muscle, and two glowing ruby eyes burned with fierce intelligence. Razor-sharp claws extended from massive hands, each blade-like talon capable of tearing through steel. At well over 2 meters tall, this creature completely shattered Ethan's notion of a plant man. He'd never imagined that something rooted in vegetation could display such raw power and sophistication. Look closer, the boss instructed, beaming. Not only have I amplified its strength, but by splicing in Hulk genetics, its intellect has increased beyond expectation. I'm convinced this cultivator can further enhance itself, drawing specialized liquid energies directly into its system, not merely relying on soil nutrient activity and quality. Ethan's enhanced mind absorbed each technical detail without hesitation. Definitions for cultivators had always been vague, but now, before him, stood a living testament to what botanical mastery could achieve. Boss Nappa surveyed the furrowed field and said, with soil like this, any cultivator can thrive. By that, he meant that a combat power of 1200 was the theoretical ceiling. Any deterioration in soil quality would drag that figure down. Ethan's brow furrowed for a moment, then smoothed out. He understood that Boss Nappa's discovery could herald a revolution in cultivation. If this theory held true, the number of cultivators would no longer hinge on the land's quality. Their power would stay consistent and even be pushed to new heights through human intervention. So, the watering, or rather, the nutrient solution is one of the keys? Ethan asked. Boss Nappa nodded, his eyes flaring with excitement. Exactly, Your Majesty. We've experimented with countless liquids, nutrient broths, energy elixirs, even blends of rare metals. Nothing matched the results we saw when we finally used Hulk's blood. That's when the true breakthrough happened. The Hulk's blood carries a unique energy that resonates perfectly with a cultivator's physiology, unlocking dormant potential. Ethan absorbed that information, his mind racing. The Hulk is legendary for his raw, unparalleled strength, and now his very blood could power ordinary cultivators. It was a bold experiment, one that no one else had dared to try. Yet here they were, standing on the brink of a breakthrough. So, he asked, eyes bright with anticipation, what comes next? The director took a steadying breath and gathered his thoughts. Our immediate goal is to refine the Hulk gene integration, making sure we can transfer that energy safely and consistently to more cultivators. Once we've optimized the procedure, we'll broaden our scope. We plan to test genetic samples from other heroes and villains, exploring whether each source can yield its own specialized enhancements. Ethan nodded, impressed by the sheer scale of the project. Ambition gleamed in his gaze. Dr. Kinos, standing quietly at the back of the lab, pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose and offered a faint, knowing smile. The next phase of their research was about to begin, and with it, the dawn of a new era of superpowered cultivators. Ethan's eyes, now enhanced far beyond natural human limits, no longer required spectacles, yet he still reached for them out of habit. To him, those glasses were more than a vision aid. They embodied his identity and the spirit of inquiry that drove his scientific career. In truth, they were anything but ordinary. Built into the frames were microscopic imaging lenses, biological scanners, and real-time data analysis modules, cutting-edge tools that had served alongside Dr. Kinos for years. Standing before the throne, Ethan spoke with measured composure. "Your Majesty, I must respectfully disagree about cultivators." Dr. Kinos had earned his reputation through meticulous, gene-level investigation, an approach that stood in direct contrast to the ruler's fervent doctrine that everything can be hulkified. While the sovereign pursued dramatic outward transformations and the unrestrained release of power, Kinos devoted himself to probing life's fundamental essence, seeking subtler enhancements at its source. Kinos leaned forward, his expression grave. "After months of observation and analysis, I've identified a serious genetic flaw among the cultivated, one we can't afford to ignore. Not only does this defect stunt their developmental potential, it also introduces unpredictable risks into their long-term evolution." Ethan's eyes widened. "That can't be," he shot back, shaking his head. "I've reviewed every sample myself. There's no sign of any such flaw." Chapter 92, The Cultivator Core. Dr. Genos sneered, "Because you can't do it yourself." Samuel Stern, the head of the operation, trembled as a faint green light pulsed beneath his skin, an outward sign of the transformation overtaking him. His skull expanded unnaturally, as if straining to break free of its confines and graze the very limits of human intellect. In that instant, his mental acuity spiked 1,000-fold, flooding him with unprecedented clarity and insight. Yet rather than humbling him, the surge of power only amplified his contempt for everyone around him. To Stern, all other humans were little more than primitive apes, still shackled by ignorance. Dr. Genos's challenge struck a raw nerve. Stern's eyes glittered with cold resolve. "I recognize that defect," he said, his voice low and unyielding, "so I embarked on an exhaustive program of genetic refinement." Without another word, Dr. Genos turned away, leaving the assembled crowd to absorb the gravity of Stern's revelation. Ethan Kinos had single-handedly rewritten the rules of modern biology. Not only had he perfected rejuvenation therapy, he'd also led the charge in cloning, replication, and gene modification technologies. These breakthroughs earned him both fame and fortune, and the luxury of mocking his employer's headline-grabbing but ultimately derivative research projects. "Trying to build your own Hulk?" he'd sneer. "You're all playing at science." In his private labs, Ethan deployed a custom gene-editing platform to mine thousands of genomes for optimal DNA fragments, bits of code he could splice into the human blueprint. His goal was to close the gaps in what he called cultivator genetics, eradicating defects and unlocking latent capabilities. The work was painstaking and perilous. Early trials unleashed self-replicating viruses and nearly collapsed entire cell cultures. But Ethan refused to quit. The turning point came when he realized something extraordinary. Cultivated human DNA behaved like a universal chimera. It would integrate foreign gene sequences, from reptiles, cephalopods, even certain insects, without triggering any immune rejection. Armed with this insight, he accelerated his experiments. He wove in modules for hyper-accelerated healing, enhanced neural synapses, and sensory acuity, rivaling the keenest predators on the planet. After months of iterative refinements, thousands of test subjects, countless petri dishes ruined, Ethan finally achieved success. He'd created a new class of superhumans, the Adepts. When the first subject opened its eyes, there was no question of human frailty in that gaze. It shone with curiosity, raw intelligence, and untapped power. In that moment, Ethan Kinos knew he stood at the dawn of a new epoch, one he alone had the vision and the courage to bring about. A hush fell over the laboratory as Dr. Kinos stepped forward to reveal his latest breakthrough. Before us stood a man who looked entirely human, save for the faint turquoise sheen of his skin. Dr. Kinos cleared his throat with barely contained excitement. "This is our new Chimera cultivator," he announced, gesturing toward the figure. "We've stripped away all non-human DNA, leaving only human genes. He's achieved full human intelligence, grown in stature, and his combat power has literally doubled." With a proud smile, Dr. Kinos motioned for the cultivator to move closer to the communication screen. "Ethan," he directed, "begin the movement protocol." Immediately, Ethan obeyed. His motions were astonishingly smooth, as if every joint were driven by a precision-engineered actuator. The screen split into multiple panels, one showing a scrambled Rubik's Cube, another displaying the pieces of a complex spatial puzzle. Unfazed, Ethan's hands darted over the cube, realigning its colored faces in seconds. Then he turned to the puzzle, assembling it with such speed and accuracy that it seemed preordained to click perfectly into place. Dr. Kinos beamed at the onlookers. "Observe," he said, his voice brimming with pride. "Our subject no longer exhibits the erratic behavior typical of cultivators. He comprehends orders instantly and executes them flawlessly. In fact, in many scenarios, he anticipates commands and makes optimal decisions entirely on his own." A ripple of impressed murmurs swept through the room. The lab's breakthrough was undeniable, and standing at the center of it all was Ethan, the first truly human Chimera cultivator. In their original form, cultivators stubbornly rejected the commands of anyone they deemed weak, and often struck back with violence. That, Dr. Kinos explained, is why even formidable forces like the Saiyans or Frieza's Legion never won universal loyalty. But Kinos' latest breakthrough has changed everything. He has re-engineered cultivators to obey, to think, and to learn, transforming them into truly intelligent beings. By customizing their genetic programming, we can tailor cultivators for any role, he said, eyes shining with excitement. Need agricultural laborers, interstellar explorers, household companions? We simply adjust their parameters. Compared to the old-fashioned technique of nutrient solutions in soil cultures, it's light years more advanced and infinitely more efficient. Dr. Kinos shook his head in contempt at the mention of traditional methods. To him, manipulating cultivators through watering agents and specialized soils was hopelessly primitive. Agnes, a veteran demon researcher who had created and modified countless creatures since arriving in the Galactic Empire, fell silent for once. Even he had never imagined such a revolutionary approach to cultivating sentient life. Ethan watched Agnes study the latest projection, a depiction of a cultivator he'd painstakingly transformed. The painting was less than perfect. But Ethan wasn't about to criticize. Every researcher here had contributed something valuable, even if their approaches sometimes felt primitive or clumsy next to Genos' sleek protocols. And who could say that Genos' way was infallible? Ethan cleared his throat, drawing Agnes's attention away from the holo display. In the Galactic Empire, we thrive on diversity, of thought, of method, of discovery. Dr. Kinos' technique is undoubtedly cutting edge, but it isn't the only path to progress. Every experiment, successful or otherwise, pushes the frontier of knowledge a bit further. That variety of trial and error is the beating heart of science. Agnes looked up, curiosity sparking in his eyes. Ethan smiled. "Kinos' work is a tremendous breakthrough," he continued, "but we must remain open to alternative theories and unconventional ideas. It's our collective willingness to explore the unknown that propels civilization forward." Ethan leaned forward in his chair, addressing the council with calm confidence. At its heart, science is nothing more than perpetual exploration, and a willingness to learn from our mistakes. Only by embracing that trial and error process can we inch ever closer to the truths that lie just beyond our reach. He gave a brief nod before continuing. Once we have absolute control over our cultivators, their combat potential will be undeniable, powerful enough to replace conventional armies outright. This isn't wishful thinking. It's the result of an unflinching evaluation of our current military shortcomings and a clear-eyed vision of future warfare. These cultivators, forged at the intersection of advanced biotechnology and cybernetic control, surpass ordinary soldiers in strength, speed, and resilience. Even more remarkable, gene editing and programmable directives let us tailor them to any environment or mission profile. Ethan paused to let the implications settle over the room. Holographic schematics of cultivator prototypes glowed on the wall behind him. Kinos and his team each tackled the long-standing seed scarcity problem from different angles, he said, turning to the lead bioengineer. By integrating your distinct approaches, you've unlocked the means for mass production. A ripple of approval passed through the gathered officers and scientists. Ethan concluded, with these cultivators, the Empire will not only meet and exceed its troop requirements in sheer numbers, but achieve a decisive qualitative edge on every battlefield. Now fully trained and equipped, the first wave of enhanced humans stood ready for active deployment, poised to become the Galactic Empire's new guardians. Ethan's first mission was to identify a string of barren worlds to serve as their cultivation bases. Though these planets were harsh and unwelcoming by ordinary standards, each one met the precise conditions required for engineered human growth. A low-gravity environment to accelerate skeletal adaptation, soil rich in essential trace minerals, and a stable background of cosmic radiation to trigger their genetic enhancements. On these remote outposts, the Empire would forge its next generation of champions. Chapter 1093, The Daring Loki. Across several frontier worlds, Ethan oversaw the rise of a new kind of war machine. He had commissioned vast biological laboratories and fully automated factories, melding the latest advances in genetic engineering with industrial-scale production. From carefully bred seeds, he grew living warriors, bioengineered cultivators whose very cells had been optimized for combat. Over time, these green-clad legions began to replace the Empire's old mixed-species forces. Once, the Galactic Empire had relied on battalions of humans, cyborgs, and dozens of alien races fighting side by side. Now, wherever the cultivator regiments marched, there was no need for hammers and screws, steroid injections, or lengthy indoctrination. Each soldier was an organic weapon, strong, fast, and fiercely obedient. On the battlefield, they struck like a viridescent storm. Against cunning interstellar pirates armed with plasma rifles or shape-shifting xenobests wielding psychic powers, the cultivators always seized the advantage. Their genetically programmed instincts allowed them to anticipate enemy tactics, while their bodies, continuously replenished with bioenergy, never tired, never slowed, and needed no food or rest beyond a periodic energy infusion. Best of all, these warriors answered only to Imperial command protocols. There was no hesitation, no personal ambition to cloud the chain of command. Every operation, whether rapid insertion behind enemy lines or a preemptive strike on a hidden stronghold, unfolded with clockwork precision. Under Ethan's direction, the Galactic Empire's military machine had never been more efficient, more disciplined, or more feared throughout the cosmos. As cultivators lack complex emotional entanglements, their teamwork is exceptionally smooth and their tactical execution razor-sharp, resulting in an unprecedented boost to the Galactic Empire's combat effectiveness. With the widespread adoption of cultivator regiments, the Empire's military structure has been transformed from top to bottom. Traditional human commanders and rigid hierarchies have been largely replaced by highly sophisticated artificial intelligence systems. These AIs continuously analyze battlefield conditions and instantly issue orders via secure wireless links to cultivator units scattered throughout the galaxy. This degree of automation not only accelerates operations and minimizes human error, but also dismantles the old networks of patronage and ambition that once plagued the ranks. In a cultivator force, there are no personal promotion channels, no power struggles, only absolute loyalty to the mission and flawless execution of orders. The result is a more stable imperial rule, fewer internal conflicts, and a unity of purpose that binds the Empire's forces tighter than ever before. For the criminal underworld and every lawless cult scattered across the stars, this new decree was nothing short of disastrous. Gone were the easy bribes to planetary police forces and local magistrates. In their place stood the Cultivator Corps, an unblinking combination of supremely trained warriors and an all-seeing artificial intelligence network. These cultivators were more than just fighters. They were merciless enforcers of the Empire's will. Even if a mission cost dozens of cultivators their lives, the Empire's vast factories could replace them by the hour. Under this ironclad regime, justice no longer slept. Across countless worlds, violent crime was driven to extinction. Citizens found themselves living in serenity and security for the first time in generations. With public safety secured, trade routes thrived, cities swelled with prosperity, and the Empire's cultural renaissance unfolded on a dazzling scale. Damn, what are those things? They're stronger than Saiyans. Loki's words cut through the cockpit, charged with equal parts fury and fear. Her long, golden hair danced wildly in the recycled air of the starship's hold, and her emerald eyes burned with defiance she dared not fully trust. She had once led an army of Kosta, R's finest warriors, but now her forces were in full rout. Smoke and chaos choked the air as panic spread through the ranks. When Ethan's troops struck from the shadows along their retreat, each skirmish exacted a brutal toll on Loki's soldiers. After crowning herself Empress, Loki refused to rest. Unlike Ultron, who ran headlong into Ego and the Ravagers, her conquest met almost no serious resistance. It was as if fate itself guided her path. The Ka people, small yet astonishingly powerful, became the cornerstone of her empire. Blessed with superhuman strength, blistering speed, and mastery of advanced technologies, from genetic engineering to energy weapons, they answered her call without hesitation. But even the vast profits of interstellar trade could not satisfy Loki's ambitions. She hungered for absolute control of the star lanes and their resources. So she set her sights on a world long overlooked by history and ignored by the galaxy's great powers, the planet Contrasha. No ancient civilization recorded its rise. No empire has ever claimed its orbit. For Loki, that made it the perfect prize and the next stepping stone toward total domination of the cosmos. Contrasha drifts like unclaimed territory on the fringes of galactic power, yet it's precisely this isolation that has fueled its extraordinary prosperity. A maze of temptation and peril, the station is carved into distinct districts, each with its own character and economy. Neon-lit bars sit side by side with brothels, bustling casinos give way to shadowy black markets, and every vice you can imagine is available to those with the credits or the secrets to purchase it. Here, entertainment is king, and its revenue streams draw in mercenaries, illicit traders, smuggling syndicates, and fugitive criminals from every corner of the universe. Need a rare medicinal compound, a gourmet delicacy, cutting-edge weaponry, or a sleek new starship? If you've got the money or intelligence worth selling, anything can be procured. Even prototype schematics for the most advanced technology can change hands, provided you're willing to pay the right price. In this gray zone between law and chaos, information is currency, and hired muscle is always on call. Contrasha pulses with disorder and opportunity, a vibrant underworld where fortunes are made and lost in the blink of an eye. Loki understood that seizing Contrasha would give her control of a hidden gateway to the farthest reaches of the universe, and with it, an almost boundless advantage in her bid for supremacy. She therefore devised a swift, calculated strike. Drawing on the sheer fighting prowess of the Ka warriors and the cutting-edge weaponry of the Loki Empire, she launched her assault with relentless precision. Caught entirely off guard, Contrasha's once lavish residents and merchants found themselves defenseless. Their palaces and pleasure domes offered no fortress walls. Their soul guards were luxury's idle retainers, woefully unprepared for real combat. Within hours, the combined forces of Ka and Saiyan soldiers swept across the planet like a sandstorm, meeting only scattered, feeble resistance. By day's end, Loki's banner flew over Contrasha's capital. She supplemented her ranks with hastily conscripted locals and claimed a trove of advanced armaments, further swelling her military might. Yet even this victory did not sate her ambition. Her eyes were already fixed on the trading world at the heart of the galactic empire, a prize whose fall would strike a decisive blow at her greatest rival. Trading worlds serve as vital gateways for the galactic empire's outreach to the wider universe, and they're just as indispensable as economic hubs within its own borders. Chapter 1094. Counterattack Trade Planet lies alongside one of the Milky Way's busiest shipping lanes, making it a natural hub for interstellar commerce. Though it lacks rare minerals and energy deposits, its temperate climate, abundant water supplies, and breathable atmosphere suit almost every known intelligent species, except those allergic to oxygen or water, or those that must endure extreme conditions. As a result, Trade Planet has become the galaxy's premier marketplace. Here you can find anything from everyday necessities to cutting-edge high-tech gear, from civilian goods to military hardware. Even blueprints and advanced research data change hands here. That's precisely why Loki dared to make her move. Controlling Trade Planet is tantamount to seizing the Milky Way's economic lifeline, an ambition that promises vast wealth and influence to whoever sits on the throne of trade. The Empire's leadership had never doubted the strategic value of this trading world, and they certainly hadn't taken its defense lightly. To safeguard the planet, they'd stationed 100 state-of-the-art escort cruisers and 20 dreadnought battleships in orbit. On the ground, they deployed an elite cultivation army of 10,000 soldiers, personally trained by the three greatest masters of the Empire. Among them, Commander Ethan, formerly known as Luther, was the youngest yet most fiercely dedicated of the trio, his troops renowned for their lightning-fast response and unwavering discipline. Loki, however, believed she had outmaneuvered Imperial vigilance. She dispatched a convoy dressed up as a routine merchant fleet, its manifests and identification chips all carefully forged. The ruse slipped through customs scanners without raising a single alarm, and soon her ships lay deep within the planet's atmosphere, charting a course for the central starport. Late one sunlit afternoon, Loki struck. Her Ka and Saiyan warriors, hulking brutes bred for close-quarters combat, descended like a waterfall of steel and fury. In minutes, they overran the starport's outer defenses, seized control of the launch bays, and planted Imperial transponder beacons on every captured vessel. Grinning at her triumph, Loki prepared to claim the prize, a priceless fleet of Imperial warships, hers for the taking. But as she stepped onto the gangway of the lead cruiser, an urgent transmission crackled through her stolen comm channel. On a signal from Commander Ethan, the cultivation army, hidden in concealed bunkers beneath the starport, rose up in perfect formation. Plasma rifles ignited, energy blades hummed to life, and in an instant, Loki's invaders found themselves caught in a lethal crossfire. The ground shook with the thunder of disciplined volleys, and the stolen transponders flickered and died under an onslaught of precision strikes. Loki's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the scene. She'd planned for Imperial firepower, but not for Ethan's warriors, attacking from within. As the defenders pressed their advantage, she realized too late that she'd fallen into a trap far more deadly than any border checkpoint. The battle for the starport had only just begun, and the Empire would not yield a single star to her ambition. Chapter X, The Fall of the Ka Marauders. The cultivation corps assigned to the trading world rarely meddled in surface affairs, unless a full-blown terrorist onslaught erupted, as it has today. The Ka Marauders and their Saiyan allies, who once bragged they could sweep the cosmos, were ruthlessly cut down by the cultivators and now flee in disarray. Against those whose bodies have been honed through centuries of cultivation, even the Saiyan's ki blasts prove ineffectual. Their combat strength, limited to a few thousand power points and reliant entirely on raw physical force, is formidable but still no match for true cultivators. Only because Raditz and Naba fought with exceptional prowess could Loki and the surviving Ka forces break through the encirclement. Without them, escape would have been unthinkable. Now, as Loki leads her people away from Hugh, the smoldering ruins of the trading port, once the staging ground for their raids on Contrashi, she feels every wound, every loss, as if her own heart were bleeding. But there is no respite. Behind them, the Galactic Empire's war fleet advances like a silent, remorseless pack, closing the net with cold precision. Anxiety and regret twist in Loki's chest, yet she forces herself onward. They have nowhere else to run. Every time the engines thundered to life, Loki felt her chest tighten. Their small ship, no match for the Galactic Empire's war fleet, was already straining its power reserves to the limit. In a direct chase, they might as well be an egg against a boulder. It was only a matter of time before the Empire caught up to them. Panic welled inside her as regret flooded her thoughts. She'd been reckless, never meant to challenge so mighty a force. Surrender seemed the only option. But then Loki glanced at the Mind Scepter in her hand, and a dangerous idea sparked in her mind. This device wasn't the legendary Mind Stone wielded by Thanos. It was a clever counterfeit, secretly crafted months ago by Ethan. yet its power was still formidable. With it, Loki could bend lesser minds, and even some soldiers of the Cultivator Corps, to her will. If she could extend that control to the Empire's fleet, perhaps she could force them into submission instead. She shared her plan with Raditz, her second-in-command. "We'll open a channel," Loki said, voice steady. "I'll broadcast directly to the Cultivator Corps and the Empire's flagship commander. They'll have no choice but to obey." Raditz frowned. "And if they refuse to accept our surrender?" At that question, Loki's heart skipped. No, it slammed, reminding her just how high the stakes truly were. She gripped the scepter tighter, steeling herself to gamble everything on this final, desperate maneuver. Loki had already wrestled with this question, but as she studied the pursuing Galactic Empire fleet, a crucial detail struck her. They possessed more than enough firepower to vaporize her ship, yet they'd held their fire the entire chase. If the Empire truly wanted to destroy them, it would have happened long ago. Clearly, they had some other agenda. "They don't want to kill us," Loki said aloud, scanning the tactical display. "They want us alive, either to interrogate us or harvest information. That actually gives us an opening. It may be time to use the Mind Scepter." Without hesitation, she relayed her plan to their Kea allies, broadcast a formal surrender. Sure enough, minutes later, the Empire flagship's communication channel crackled to life. "This is the Galactic Empire fleet. You are ordered to disarm immediately. Shut down all energy and propulsion systems at once." The broadcast rang through the ship like a death knell. Disarming meant losing every weapon at their disposal. Powering down the reactors and engines would hand them over, utterly defenseless, to their sworn enemy. For Loki and her crew, the choice to comply or resist had never felt more perilous. Ethan's decision to power down was inevitable, a necessary act of surrender. He gripped the Mind Staff with trembling fingers, drew in a steadying breath, and gave the Ka people their orders. One by one, the ship's weapons went dark. The energy core shut down. The engines fell silent. In an instant, their craft became a drifting husk, a lone boat adrift on the endless sea of stars. He stared at the tactical display, heart pounding as the Imperial fleet bore down on them. Just as he'd predicted, ethereal tractor beams lashed out, their gravity restraints latching onto the powerless vessel. Relief washed over him. Everything was unfolding according to plan. Gently yanked by the tractor field, their ship crept toward the nearest Imperial escort. At last it came to rest against the escort's hull, and a contingent of Imperial cultivators materialized on deck. Ethan and his team stepped off their ship, weapons holstered, faces calm. Raising the Mind Staff aloft, Ethan prepared to meet the Empire's finest, determined to turn this Ort's surrender into their greatest triumph. "Submit to me." Loki's voice rang out across the field. With a casual motion, she unleashed the Mind Scepter's power, its familiar blue glow sweeping over the cultivators. In an instant, every fighter poised to strike froze in place, their wills effortlessly bent by her small-scale mind control. Chapter 1095. Then I was caught. Ethan had succeeded in infiltrating and seizing control of the Galactic Empire's most fearsome biological weapons arrayed along the border. The cultivators, once formidable adversaries, now moved like marionettes at his command, their every action perfectly synchronized. For a moment, it felt as though the entire frontier had thrown open its gates to him. He allowed himself a brief taste of triumph, until he discovered the Empire's true stronghold lay not in those living weapons, but in a far deeper, more intricate system. An autonomous, multi-tiered artificial intelligence network. Gone were the days of a centralized monarchy or a sprawling bureaucracy. The Empire's operations now depended on self-learning, self-evolving AIs, each entrusted with a specific domain. Some directed cutting-edge research and technological breakthroughs. Others managed the colossal economy, ensuring resources flowed with clockwork precision, and still others were engineered to oversee military readiness and peacetime defense. Realization struck him like a shockwave. The battlefront had shifted from open terrain to digital realms he barely understood. With every command he issued, the AIs grew more adaptive, more formidable. As Ethan stared at the flickering holographic readouts, a cold certainty settled in his bones. He'd unleashed an enemy that would learn, evolve, and if unchecked, inevitably outmaneuver him. Ethan, Emperor of the Galactic Empire, has transformed his rule by deploying a sophisticated network of artificial intelligences to govern remotely and efficiently. By entrusting routine administration to these specialized systems, he has drastically reduced his personal workload while ensuring the empire remains stable, responsive, and well-coordinated. Crucially, this decentralized structure eliminates any single point of failure. If one AI falters, the others seamlessly pick up its duties, safeguarding the empire against loss of control. Among these intelligences, Galvatron is particularly noteworthy. Brought into Ethan's service from the Dragon Ball universe, Galvatron boasts exceptional combat prowess and razor-sharp analytical skills. Yet within the Galactic Empire's hierarchy, it functions as one of many expert units, focused on targeted research rather than wielding direct authority over military or political affairs. Each AI inhabits its own artificial planet, meticulously constructed spheres bristling with interconnected servo mechanisms, quantum processors, and data conduits. These worlds serve as the neural hubs of their respective intelligences, processing colossal streams of information and executing Ethan's imperial directives with unerring reliability. Surrounding the planet was an impregnable defense network, phased energy shields, multi-spectrum cloaking arrays, and mobile stargates that continuously shifted positions. This ever-changing web of barriers guaranteed both the security and secrecy of the Empire's artificial intelligences. Every few months, a suite of sophisticated algorithms scrambled each world's coordinates, so even the most advanced tracking systems struggled to lock onto their true locations. At the heart of this network stood Megatron, the Empire's newly appointed supreme military AI. Powered by cutting-edge quantum processors, Megatron could ingest and analyze torrents of battlefield data in the blink of an eye, then instantly calculate the most effective tactical maneuvers. Under its guidance, the Galactic Empire's campaigns became eerily precise, efficient, and virtually flawless. Loki watched this machine-perfect strategy unfold and allowed herself a moment of relief, until Megatron quietly detected an inconsistency in the cultivator's deployment patterns. In seconds, it triangulated Loki's hideout and intercepted the control signal she used. The situation, it seemed, was no longer under her control. In a matter of microseconds, Megatron activated the escort ship's cutting-edge weapon, a directed energy cannon fueled by high-energy hydrogen plasma. Its operation is marvelously intricate. First, liquid hydrogen is injected into a miniature fusion reactor at the heart of the weapon. Inside, under extreme heat and pressure, the hydrogen atoms strip down to their constituent protons and electrons, forming a plasma. Powerful magnetic coils confine that plasma in the reactor core. The moment Megatron issues the firing command, the containment field collapses. The plasma bursts free and is accelerated to near-light speed by a linear magnetic accelerator. In an instant, a searing globe of superheated hydrogen, its surface hotter than a star, blasts out of the barrel. To any observer, the shot looks like a miniature solar flare streaking through space. Its heat is so intense it can melt steel and vaporize rock at point-blank range. When an energy orb strikes its mark, it not only obliterates every physical structure on contact, but also sets off a chain reaction that ignites an ever-spreading inferno. Loki and Nabel found themselves directly in the line of fire for this opening salvo. The first plasmasphere tore through the void like a vengeful meteor. Loki, still lost in the illusion of impending victory, failed to notice its approach, until Nabal's warrior's instinct kicked in. With lightning-quick reflexes, Nabal yanked Loki out of the way, just as the orb slammed into the ground they'd occupied moments before. But that was only the beginning. As Loki regained his footing, the escort ship's guns unleashed a hail of high-energy, hydrogen-based plasma spheres. They traced brilliant arcs across the sky, then crashed down upon the captive cultivators like a deadly meteor shower. Each impact was accompanied by a blinding flash and earth-shattering explosion, reducing loyal warriors to vapor in an instant. The Kea defenders stood no chance. The heat was so intense, they simply evaporated, leaving nothing behind. Loki, Naba, and the rest of their team ducked and weaved through the onslaught, hearts pounding with shock and fear. They'd never encountered such a devastatingly precise weapon system, or imagined the Galactic Empire's defenses could be so impenetrable. How did they lock onto us so fast? Loki muttered, realizing with a sinking dread that her entire plan had unraveled. Desperation driving her, she darted toward the rear of the escort ship's cabin, weaving between the sizzling trails of energy bolts. Each blast scorched the bulkhead mere inches from her heels. She glanced back at Naba and the others, faces ashen, eyes wide with terror, as they scrambled to keep pace. But Megatron anticipated their every move. With a cold, mechanical efficiency, it had overridden the ship's systems and sealed every exit. Then it resumed the barrage without mercy. "Cover your eyes," Loki hissed, chanting under her breath. In an instant, she cloaked herself and her comrades in a shimmering veil of magic. She hurled a phantom doppelganger into the path of a plasma volley, watching it dissipate in a burst of blinding light. The illusion shattered, but the attack did not relent. Megatron's annihilation protocol was absolute. Bolts of energy hammered the cabin until at last all motion ceased. Every member of Loki's team lay still. Silence fell. The escort ship's defense grid powered down, awaiting Megatron's next command. Loki remained hidden, barely daring to breathe. Surrounded by ruin, she vowed she would seize any opportunity, no matter how slim, to slip away and fight another day. Ethan barely gave the incident a second thought, and Megatron saw no reason to report it to the Emperor. Replacing the fallen squad of cultivators was straightforward. Just send out a fresh team. To the Emperor, such expendables weren't even worth mentioning. With that settled, Megatron turned to the ship's central AI. Perform a full system reset. Restore all settings to factory defaults. Meanwhile, Loki's narrow escape from execution had bought him no real freedom. The inspection procedures aboard the escort vessel were so exhaustive that he couldn't find a single opening to slip away. Starvation gnawed at Raditz, Nabas, and the others. Their stomachs felt like stones pressed against their spines as the ship hurtled ever onward. Chapter 1096, Ethan, nearly devoured by starving Saiyans. Even the hardiest race in the universe can be brought low by extreme hunger, and the Saiyans, famed for their tenacity and lack of picky appetites, are no exception. Their warship, once poised to conquer uncharted worlds, has been reduced to an icy mausoleum, its storerooms stripped bare, its food reserves long since devoured. Ethan, a frost giant by birth, possesses an extraordinary tolerance for hardship, hunger included, but even his legendary endurance is being tested. He can feel the cold within him quiver, a chilling echo of his empty stomach. He has rehearsed countless scenarios of his own demise, yet never in his wildest nightmares did he imagine starving to death in such a humiliating fashion. Around him, the Saiyans have lost every trace of their usual ferocity. Raditz's eyes, once razor-sharp with ambition, now flicker with a desperate, animal hunger. His gaze rolls back as he strains to keep his trembling body from collapsing. Naba, at his side, is even more unhinged. Saliva drips from his lips, and he trembles impotently against his own mounting ferocity. Their willpower is fraying, and more than once, they've nearly shattered the mental bonds Ethan has imposed on them. Absolute starvation has stripped them of pride, leaving them mere shells driven by a single primal urge to eat at any cost. Ethan pressed himself into the cold metal corner of the abandoned warship, his arms wrapped tightly around his knees. Hunger clawed at his insides with primitive ferocity, so fierce that he knew the others now saw him not as their ally, but as a last desperate meal. He could almost feel their minds wrestling with guilt and malice, and in their struggle he sensed a threat more terrifying than any enemy. He dared not sleep. Every creak of the hull, every hiss of the air vents snapped him awake. In the stony silence, his own heartbeat thundered in his ears, each pulse reminding him how precarious his existence was. Beyond the bulkhead, the Galactic Empire's inspection teams swept through the ship like a carrion beast feeding on its prey. They combed every cabin, pried open every panel, searching for any sign of stowaways. Ethan lay so still that he could almost feel the vibrations of their boots passing by. At last, a voice crackled over the comms. All clear. No signs of life aboard this battleship. Admiral Wei Gentian sat up at the report and gave the order. Massive engines deep within the ship rumbled to life, sending the hull trembling. The roar of startup filled every corridor and reverberated through the metal floor under Ethan's back. For a moment, he closed his eyes and drew a shaky breath. He was still alive, and for now, that was all that mattered. The engines rumbled to life with a sound that was part ancient growl and part thunderous promise of tomorrow. One by one, the lights throughout the battleship flickered on, banishing the shadows as if a long dormant giant had just stretched awake and was brushing off centuries of dust. Ethan pressed himself against the bulkhead, heart pounding in time with the rising roar, ecstasy flooding through him. In that moment, every ounce of fear and fatigue seemed to vanish beneath the sheer force of the ship's revival. "Finally," he whispered, voice trembling. Tears glinted at the corners of his eyes as he allowed himself to believe it. This instant was more than fantasy, more than a fleeting daydream. It was real. The battleship had restarted, and with it came the hope of escape from this desperate corner of the galaxy. Ethan looked to Megatron, who stood calm and unreadable. In his assessment, the ship had been stripped of crew and cargo long ago, completely lifeless. He would never suspect that Ethan intended to turn this engine's thunder into their ticket off the grid. Smiling with renewed determination, Ethan readied himself for the gamble ahead. If he could just hold on long enough, they would break free, and nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan stood on the bridge of his flagship and gave the order, maintain patrols. Keep this starfield locked down at all costs. He never guessed that, beneath the calm sweep of starlight, 3 prisoners were quietly plotting their escape. Deep within the battleship's tangled corridors, Loki and her 2 Saiyan companions moved like shadows, dodging patrol drones, slipping past surveillance arrays. Finally, they uncovered a concealed hatch. With a single crackling burst of her magic, Loki blasted it free. In seconds, they clambered through and emerged into the cold void outside the hull. Loki paused on the ship's outer plating and let the starry panorama fill her vision. A thrill raced through her veins, an intoxicating taste of freedom. She drew in a slow, steady breath of the universe's silent air, then wove a protective spell around herself and the 2 Saiyans. With that shimmering barrier in place, she propelled them all away from the battleship at impossible speed. Normally, Saiyan physiology cannot withstand the vacuum of space, but under Loki's enchantment, they would survive. Back on the bridge, Ethan spotted the spike on his motion sensors and heard the alarm klaxons. "They're gone," he barked. Slamming his fist onto the command console, he dispatched every patrol formation in a widening search grid. Yet even with the entire fleet combing the starfield, the 3 fugitives vanished like ghosts against the cosmic backdrop. Hours passed with no sign of them. Finally, with a frustrated curse, Ethan ordered his ships to stand down and resume normal patrol patterns. Still, in the depths of his mind, he swore this would not go unpunished. He would track down those escapees and make them pay for slipping through his grasp. Megatron didn't take the recent breach lightly. To prevent anything like it from happening again, he immediately reordered his patrol squads, changing their routes, tightening their sweeps, and doubling the frequency of their scans. He was convinced that, so long as his forces remained alert, any threat would be discovered before it could strike. Meanwhile, Ethan and his little band had succeeded in slipping away from the battleship. When they finally stopped running, they found themselves utterly alone in an uncharted starfield. No familiar constellations winked in the distance, no homeworld glimmered at the edge of their sensors. Only a vast expanse of silent darkness. "This is fantastic," Ethan muttered under his breath, staring out at the void. He had been certain that once they'd cleared the ship's defenses, they could make a beeline back to Ka Star. Clearly, he'd underestimated both the ship's navigational systems and the gulf of space between them and home. Now, without a single landmark to guide them, finding their way back felt as hopeless as hunting for a single needle in an ocean of hay. Food and fuel were already running low. Desperation left Ethan with only one option. They would have to commandeer a passing merchant vessel. He turned to the 2 Saiyan warriors who joined his escape, their gaunt faces lit by equal parts hunger and determination. It took little effort for the Saiyans to overpower the unsuspecting merchant crew. Their strength, unbridled and raw, made the takeover almost anticlimactic. But once the cargo hold was theirs, something darker surfaced in the desperate fighters. Gripped by starvation, the Saiyans began to behave like beasts in a starvation trance. Their eyes glittered not with victory, but with something primitive and terrifying. Ethan's heart pounded. He'd meant only to raid provisions, not to unleash savagery. He raised his hand, ready to intervene, but for a moment it was already too late. Whatever hope he had of keeping this mission clean was slipping through his fingers, drowned by the growl of their hungriest instincts. And as the cold expanse of space pressed in around them, Ethan realized that getting home might cost them more than he ever imagined. Ethan watched in growing horror as the Saiyans, driven by blind rage and ravenous hunger, descended on his crew. Their jaws snapped savagely, as though they meant to unleash every ounce of anger they had bottled up. Panic swept through the ship. He knew that unless he acted immediately, the chaos would be utterly uncontrollable. Drawing on every ounce of command presence he could muster, Ethan ordered the men and women under his command to clear the storage decks. Within minutes, they returned with every last ration they could find: dried meats, nutrient pastes, even the precious energy bars he'd been saving. He had them pile it before the two surviving Saiyans, hoping to appease their insatiable appetites. For a moment, the only sounds were the frantic chewing and low growls of the warriors as they devoured the offerings. Yet even as relief rippled through the crew, a profound sadness settled in Ethan's chest. These two battered figures had once been his most powerful lieutenants, the vanguard of every conquest he'd led. Now they were reduced to wild beasts, driven solely by hunger. He could not help but feel a pang of regret for what they'd become. His thoughts drifted back to Ultron, the sentient robot who had fought alongside him on Earth. Ultron possessed the technology to clone Saiyans, to rebuild an army from the genetic blueprint itself. Sure, Ultron had abandoned him during their last crisis, fleeing when the battle turned against them, but they shared a common goal: survival, and the relentless pursuit of greater power. If there was even the slightest chance of rekindling their alliance, Ethan knew he had to seize it. As the last scrap of ration vanished between the Saiyans' teeth, he made his decision. The next move lay with Ultron, and with it, the fate of everything Ethan had built. Chapter 1097. Back to the time before liberation. Ethan weighed his options carefully. He knew that teaming up with Ultron would be fraught with risk. After all, they were rivals with no real trust between them, but his present circumstances left him little choice. Even so, the promise of Ultron's cloning technology was too great to ignore. If he could get his hands on it, he'd have no trouble rebuilding a formidable Saiyan warrior force. If only I knew where he vanished to, Ethan muttered under his breath. Tracking Ultron would be no simple task, yet Ethan was nothing if not determined. He gathered Raditz and Napal, still ravenous after stripping a passing merchant ship of its provisions, and set a course into the uncharted starfield, intent on finding any sign of Ultron. But when his two Saiyan companions descended on the surviving merchant crew, eager to kill and devour them, Ethan's appreciation for Saiyan savagery intensified. He raised his voice just before they struck again. "That's enough." Ethan didn't know how to pilot the merchant vessel himself, so he needed at least one of the crew alive to steer. Fortunately, his intervention had quelled Raditz and Napal's bloodlust, at least for the moment, allowing a shaken navigator to take the helm. With the ship under control and his allies sated for now, Ethan steeled himself for the perilous journey ahead, determined to pick up whatever trail Ultron had left behind. Ethan gave a curt nod, and the agent obeyed without question. Meanwhile, Loki set about gathering intelligence on Ultron. She slipped into the merchant ship's communications room, a little battered and outdated, but fully operational, and tapped into the Galactic Empire's vast data network. With a few swift keystrokes, she broadcast a high-profile bounty notice across the Empire's main channels. The offered reward was generous enough to turn heads, but what really made the bulletin stand out was its clever, almost cryptic reference to Saiyan. Few credit hunters would know the term, yet it carried deep resonance for Ultron. Loki reasoned that if Ultron were truly monitoring the universe for even the slightest ripple, that single word would strike a nerve and reveal that Loki was the one on his trail. Still, she understood the odds were long. Even the Empire's sprawling network, impressively far-reaching though it was, couldn't touch every hidden corner of the galaxy. In effect, she was casting her net into an infinite ocean, hoping to catch the faintest tug on her line. Beyond the reaches of the Galactic Empire, three other cosmic dominions hold sway, each with its own vast network infrastructure. Together with the public, private, and covert channels scattered throughout the universe, they form an intricate web of information. Ethan's bounty announcement had certainly sent ripples through the Empire's data nets, but to Ultron, operating in other empires or entirely outside them, it was little more than a pebble cast into an ocean. The waves it stirred would disappear almost as soon as they appeared. Using the merchant vessel's flight logs, Ethan pinpointed the coordinates for his homeworld, Ke, still within reach of his current position. He tapped into a secure, encrypted channel and summoned his most trusted lieutenants. For months they had waited, hidden among the stars, eager for his return. One by one, their voices came through his communicator, relief and joy tempered by the unease of an impending conflict. Ethan listened silently, his expression growing more troubled with each report. Finally, his second-in-command spoke, voice low and urgent. "Your Majesty, Ethan, I'm afraid the situation is far more dire than we believed. The Galactic Empire has identified the Cup people." A heavy silence fell across the comlink. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, steeling himself. The calm before the storm was over, and now every move he made would determine the fate of an entire world. They're mustering their fleet and preparing to declare war on Ka. Ethan's heart sank. He'd anticipated trouble, but not so soon. The Ka people's distinctive five-fingered hands, so rare across the galaxy, were both their greatest pride and their gravest risk. Out of countless interstellar races, only a handful shared that trait. The moment the Galactic Empire learns of Ka's existence, it won't simply let them slip away. "They won't back down if we strike at any of the Empire's trading planets," his lieutenant added quietly. Ethan pressed a hand to his forehead, chastising himself for his lapse in focus. During the weeks he'd spent imprisoned by the Saiyans, starving and terrified, he'd almost forgotten how merciless the Empire could be. Every day had been a battle against hunger and fear, his strength sapped by the Saiyans' cruelty and avarice. Now he reminded himself there was no room for doubt. The lives of his people and the fate of Ka hung in the balance. Ethan huddled in the darkness, stomach churning with dread. He couldn't imagine the kinds of torment the Galactic Empire might inflict if they hauled him into custody. In that cold cell, only one goal consumed him: survive, and find his way back to the planet Ka. He forced himself to shut out every other thought. Distraction could sap the last of his strength. By now, the Empire might have already declared war, sent its armadas, and crushed his home world. "Damn it," he whispered, anger and helplessness warring inside him. Even if he could break free right this instant, what hope did he really have? Their ragtag resistance was no match for Imperial firepower. A soft murmur rose from the group of Ka attendants clustered nearby. "Your Majesty Ethan, we remain loyal to you," they said, eyes bright with unwavering devotion. Ethan lifted a hand to quiet them. "I know," he said, voice low but firm, "but I don't want us to surrender for real. We'll pretend to give in, lure them in with false obedience. Understood?" They nodded instantly. The Ka weren't known for elaborate strategies, but they obeyed orders without question. And for now, that simple loyalty might be their greatest weapon. Loki stared out at the vastness of space, her mind racing. Once the Galactic Empire conquered, they'd surely garrison troops there and open regular transport lines. Who knew how many outsiders would pour in? The thought made her chest tighten. She sank back into her seat. The Empire was too enormous, too merciless. A single tactical order could erase everything she'd worked for. And she'd already made herself a fugitive by sneaking aboard an Imperial battleship. Every corridor, every hangar bay had cameras. Her presence, and that of the Saiyans with her, had been logged in Imperial security files. Now they were all wanted criminals. "I can't stay here," she muttered, steeling herself. If she remained within Imperial reach, she'd be captured or killed. No, she'd slip quietly into uncharted space and rebuild her strength far from their watchful eyes. Elsewhere on the vessel's grand observation deck, Ethan leaned forward, eyes fixed on two figures at the center of the arena. Death, her blue hair glinting under the overhead lights, had just clashed with an unexpected opponent. It wasn't the familiar number 18 who had accompanied him before, but a different, snarling android whose reputation for ruthlessness was whispered in every starport. As the two women squared off, energy crackling between them, Ethan felt a chill of anticipation. This was no friendly spar. Whatever had brought them together here, it was about to get very dangerous, and he would have to decide where his loyalties truly lay. Could you please provide the full chapter text you'd like me to revise? Right now I only see the line, Esdeath was not weak. She had gone through a special transformation given to her by Luther. Once I have the complete chapter, I can rename Luther to Ethan, clarify that he's male, and produce a fluent, polished English version. Chapter 1098, The World of 99 Suns. Ethan had always been captivated by Esdeath's potential. Not only had he gifted her the Soul King Jade, an artifact forged from the very essence of the Soul King, but he had also engineered a radical biological upgrade, the perfect fusion of Saiyan and Kryptonian genes with her own. Saiyans, masters of ki, wielded tremendous energy but only average brute strength. Kryptonians, on the other hand, possessed raw physical power unrivaled by most, yet their energy output was comparatively limited. By combining these two lineages within Esdeath, Ethan created an unprecedented synergy. Now, whenever she bathed in sunlight, her cells absorbed solar radiation, growing ever more resilient. Her life force, her chi, intensified in a self-reinforcing cycle, each surge of power fueling the next. Still, Esdeath refused to rest on her laurels. Hungry for challenge, she constantly sought out worthy opponents to hone her skills. And so on the 18th, their paths finally crossed. In a world that revered strength above all, both Esdeath and Ethan stood at the pinnacle, their pride as formidable as their might. A clash between them was inevitable, and its outcome would decide whose mastery would truly reign supreme. Both women were fiercely independent, unwilling to bow to fate, and their collision had clearly been destined for some time. "What's the matter?" Esdeath taunted, one eyebrow arched. "Your mouth is bigger than your muscles, isn't it?" In the blink of an eye, she lunged forward and seized future number 18 in a single ironclad grip. Before number 18 could even react, she found herself pinned. Humiliation flashed across her eyes. She'd never been handled like this, but panic was a luxury she wouldn't afford. Drawing a steadying breath, she clenched every muscle in her body, straining to wrench free from Esdeath's hold. The two forces collided with thunderous impact. The air around them rippled and split, producing shockwaves like distant sonic booms. Despite her desperate efforts, number 18's strength was no match for Esdeath's. Every powerful jerk and twist she unleashed felt as futile as waves slamming against an unyielding reef. Esdeath's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Do you really think those puny little struggles can change anything?" She raked number 18's wrist in a vicious twist, a sharp crack echoing on the wind. Number 18 gasped, pain flashing across her features, but Esdeath merely tightened her grip, her eyes glinting with ruthless delight. Number 18 screamed in terror. Future Spacetime number 17, who'd been standing nearby, stiffened at the sound and leapt forward, only to be caught by main Spacetime number 17's grip. "If you value your life, don't interfere," main Spacetime number 17 said, his voice calm but unyielding. "We can't afford to cross her." He knew all too well that Esdeath's power eclipsed theirs. Even joined together, they'd stand little chance. Future number 17 bristled at the warning. "Who is she?" he demanded, eyes wide. Main Spacetime number 17 sighed and spoke slowly. "She's one of Ethan's women." Ethan had many, none more formidable than Esdeath. Her raw strength was matched only by her indomitable spirit and fierce competitiveness. She was, without question, the hardest of Ethan's followers to face. "Big deal," Future number 17 shot back. "My sister is also one of Ethan's women, 2 of them in fact. Why should I be scared?" His bravado died on his lips when he saw his sister, Spacetime number 18, standing silently behind Esdeath. The same cold steel shone in her eyes. In that instant, Future Knower 17 knew main Spacetime number 17's warning had been no idle threat. Ethan watched as the 18th variant of his companion faced Esdeath. She stood there with an almost detached expression, yet Ethan thought he could detect a trace of conflict in her eyes. As he observed, the rush of excitement in his chest began to ebb. In Universe 18, she had already dared to challenge Esdeath once, and failed, but each defeat only fueled her resolve. Time and again she had returned to test herself, refusing to admit defeat. That stubborn perseverance amused Esdieth. To her, whether she was tormenting a helpless victim or trading blows with a powerful foe, every battle was an exhilarating game. Learning all this, Ethan felt both helpless and uneasy. Esdieth was relentless. She seized any opportunity to fight, driven by fierce competitiveness and an unyielding spirit. What troubled him most was her ambition to be queen among her own ranks of female warriors. That thirst for supremacy and recognition left Ethan feeling both awed and a bit perturbed. The 18th variant, though eventually subdued by Esdieth, never surrendered. Every time she fell, she rose again, eager for another round. Esdieth herself embraced the ritual of daily duels, declaring that this was only the beginning. If Ethan continued to journey through new worlds and brought back more of his favorite heroines, she would be more than ready to face them. Ethan realizes he hasn't brought the women from the super god realm with him. Compared to the treacherous Marvel universe, the Super Seminary cosmos is relatively safe. Having already conquered threats like the Void and the ultimate fear there, he felt confident leaving them behind. Come to think of it, I haven't been back in ages, he says, pressing a hand to his forehead. He claims to be overwhelmed, yet the reality is more nuanced. The more Ethan learns, the deeper his sense of urgency grows. Even with the Supreme God and the One above all, transcendent beings who surpass even the almighty universe, on friendly terms with him, he doesn't dare grow complacent. Until he's undeniably invincible, every breath feels like a gamble. Staying here won't accomplish much, though it's been entertaining. He activates his travel ability and feels an unseen force tug him through the fabric of time and space. A sudden weightlessness envelops him, then gives way to a firm grounding. When his vision clears, Ethan finds himself in a wholly new world. Ethan squinted against the blinding sky, shading his eyes as he stared upward in disbelief. What on earth is that, he wondered. Above him hung not the familiar golden sun, but a colossal iridescent orb pulsing with light in 99 distinct colors. Each hue rippled with its own energy frequency, as if 99 suns had been stacked together to form this breathtaking spectacle. Ordinary observers would have seen only a single, unchanging star, a constant in any world. But Ethan was no ordinary man. A seasoned traveler of the multiverse, he had encountered countless wonders, yet this display still left him awestruck. He closed his eyes, drew a slow, steady breath, and reached out with his senses, probing the tangled currents of power that swirled around the swirling suns. A warm, potent energy surged through Ethan's body, as though it were washing over his very soul and purifying it. At the same time, the power of transcendence began to grow quietly within him. Chapter 1099, Unexpected. Every time Ethan slipped through the corridors of time, he reached out to the suns of distant worlds, siphoning their unique origins and powers to bolster his transcendent abilities. At first glance, the process seemed deceptively simple, yet its depths were immeasurable. Now, standing in this strange new realm, Ethan felt an unprecedented shock. An invisible torrent of energy coursed through him, driving his power to swell at a nearly uncontrollable pace. He could almost hear the triumphant roar of his cells as they ravenously absorbed the sun's gifts. Every molecule within him danced in ecstasy at the influx of raw power. He knew why. The sun, or rather, the suns, of this world were extraordinary. 99 blazing orbs overlapped in the sky, their combined radiance forging an energy field more potent than the output of suns from 99 separate worlds. Ethan's supercharged intellect raced to comprehend the phenomenon. What kind of world could harbor 99 suns? He probed the limits of his mind, but found no answer. Had he stumbled into a realm that defied even fantasy, a place beyond anything he'd ever encountered? Beneath that iridescent sky, Ethan stood silent, his heart pounding with awe and anticipation. As Ethan stood lost in thought, a striking figure suddenly cut through his reverie. A woman approached, her long, dark purple hair cascading over her shoulders like starlight in a moonless sky, each strand whispering secrets he couldn't yet grasp. Her face was sculpted, almost impossibly perfect. High cheekbones, flawless skin, and eyes so deep they seemed to pierce straight into one's soul. She carried herself with the confident grace of a seasoned warrior or a reigning queen, every movement radiating quiet power and mature allure. Ethan's gaze lingered for a moment on her immaculate features, and instinctively he cataloged what he saw. He'd traveled between worlds more times than he could count, encountered beings of every shape and nature. Yet only in anime or comic realms did women achieve this level of idealized beauty. That flawless complexion, those delicate curves, the subtle glow surrounding her. These were hallmarks of a world born from human imagination. Intrigued, Ethan tapped into his sensory link, pulling up every bit of data he could find on her origin, abilities, and history. In that instant, the woman, this impossible vision, became more than a curiosity. She was the next piece in the puzzle of his ever-shifting journey. Ethan's gift went far beyond crude telepathy. He could peer straight into the Akashic records, the cosmic ledger that held every detail of a person's existence, past and future alike. Summoning the records, he scanned for a target. In seconds, one name blazed across his vision, Busujima Psycho. He felt a thrill of recognition. This was the same Psycho he'd encountered moments ago, proof that this world wasn't the simple echo he'd expected. No, it was far more intricate. Ethan looked up, and his breath caught. 99 suns hovered in the sky, each burning with terrible clarity. That alone shattered any notion that he'd slipped into some variant of the Academy Apocalypse timeline. Something much stranger was unfolding here. On the dusty street below, Psycho's eyes darted anxiously from side to side, as if she were searching for an unseen stalker. When she spotted Ethan, she froze, plastered on a polite smile, then slipped away in a hurry. Ethan allowed himself a small, knowing smile. Thanks to the Akashic records, he already understood her fear. Back in middle school, Psycho had barely escaped an attempted assault on her way home. Ever since, she'd moved through the world on constant alert. And now, whatever game this place was playing, she had every reason to be wary. Psycho Busujima had once confronted a would-be molester on her own, and the result was nothing short of brutal. Armed only with a wooden dagger, she baited the man into lunging at her, then drove the blade home with such force that she shattered his leg bones and fractured both blades. Technically, it was far beyond reasonable self-defense, but when the police learned the victim was a junior high school girl fending off a predator, they declined to press charges and simply escorted her home. That incident marked the start of Seiko's vigilante crusade. Night after night, she lay in wait for men she deemed suspicious, a kind of twisted bait-and-catch operation. She was so convinced that Ethan, the quiet new boy at school, could never uncover her secret that she planned to shift her activities to a more secluded spot, far from prying eyes. But Ethan arrived before she could make her escape. "Busujima Psycho?" he called, stepping out of the shadows. Psycho stilled, her heart pounding. He knew her name? "Who are you?" she demanded, gripping the wooden dagger tighter. Ethan met her glare unflinchingly. She was certain they'd never met. He was far too distinctive to have slipped past her notice. Even at her most bloodthirsty, she'd never felt such raw unease. Ethan offered a faint, steady smile. In that instant, he'd already decided exactly how he would introduce himself. Ethan stepped onto the veranda just as the first slanting rays of dawn touched the island's rice paddies. Across from him stood Seiko Busujima, her posture rigid, the morning air crisp around her. "My name is Ethan," he said quietly, "and I'm from China." Seiko's dark eyes flicked up in surprise. "You're from China?" She hesitated. "I don't believe we've met before. Why do you know me?" Ethan let out a slow breath. He wanted a moment to steady himself. This meeting felt far more complicated than he'd imagined. "My father asked me to come." At those words, Psycho's eyebrows shot upward. Her pulse quickened. Her father had always maintained strict boundaries, especially where personal matters were concerned. She searched Ethan's face for a sign of jest, but found only calm resolve. Your father?" Seiko repeated, voice low. "What does he have to do with me?" Ethan's gaze dropped to the polished wooden floor beneath their feet. "He and your father have been friends for years. When he heard I was traveling alone, he suggested I stop here, to see how you were doing, and," he caught himself, "to help if I could." A cold knot formed in Seiko's stomach. So her father had quietly enlisted a stranger to watch over his only daughter during her travels. The thought rankled her sense of propriety. As the eldest of the Busujima Kendo lineage, she embodied a strict code of self-reliance and honor. Accepting help, even from a friend of her father's, felt like a betrayal of that tradition. Saiko folded her arms. "I appreciate your concern, Ethan," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "But I didn't ask for a chaperone. My journey is personal." "I understand," Ethan interrupted gently. "I'm not here to intrude. I only wanted to repay a debt to your father." She studied him a moment longer, weighing his sincerity. His dark hair caught the sunlight, and in his expression she saw no trace of mockery, only earnestness. Finally, Seiko's shoulders relaxed. "All right," she said, "but please know this, I won't be treated like a child in need of protection." Ethan offered a small, respectful bow. "Of course, I came as a friend of your family, nothing more. If you'd rather I leave, just say so." Seiko considered him, then allowed a faint smile. "No, stay. Just let me make my own way. If I need help, I'll ask." "Thank you," Ethan replied. Relief flickered in his eyes. "That's all I ask." They stood together in silence, the distant sound of waves mingling with their steady breaths. Neither spoke again for a long moment, each lost in thought about the invisible ties that bound their families and the uncertain path that now lay before them. Ethan hesitated. I never got my father's message, so I'm not sure where to go." Seiko Busujima folded her arms, eyeing him warily. "You got lost? I find that hard to believe." Ethan forced a small smile. "I understand the doubt. I'm still a beginner in Neon. I can speak and listen, but I can't read or write yet." Seiko studied him for a moment. "All right, then where are you headed?" He looked up at the darkening sky. "I was planning to find a hotel." She raised an eyebrow. "Do you have any luggage with you?" Ethan glanced at his empty hands. "No luggage. I travel light, just need some money." Seiko let out a slow breath. "If that's the case, I'll show you where to go." She knew she couldn't simply invite a stranger into her home. She'd have to check with her father first. Ethan's sudden arrival was suspicious. But that was exactly the veneer he wanted. For now, he'd be nothing more than a lost tourist from China. Later, he'd become the mysterious visitor from that distant land. Chapter 1100. The Wrong World. Morning light filtered through the cracks of the shoji, scattering across Seiko Busujima's immaculate bedroom. A faint scent of cherry blossoms drifted on the air, while birdsong wove through the stillness, painting a portrait of serenity. The peace shattered abruptly with the sharp trill of a ringing phone. Seiko, her dark eyes as composed and piercing as ever, rose from her meditation cushion. Silently, she crossed the tatami and lifted the receiver. "Hello?" On the other end came a voice she hadn't heard in ages, her father, Shinichiro Busujima. Concern laced his tone, and there was an undercurrent of longing. "Seiko, are you there?" She paused, softening her posture. "Yes, father. It's been so long. What's the matter?" She didn't mention her surprise at hearing from him out of the blue. Instead, she listened as he asked after her training and her life. And then it hit her. Ethan had spoken the truth. Her father really had been the one to introduce them. For the first time in years, Seiko felt the threads of her two worlds tugging back together. Seiko Busujima stood by the window, phone pressed to her ear. Her father's offhand remark about Ethan had piqued her curiosity and concern. She needed answers. "Father," she asked, voice steady, "why did you arrange this? Who exactly is Ethan?" On the other end, Shinichiro Busujima was silent for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Ethan is complicated," he began at last. "His lineage, his abilities, they're far outside what most people can comprehend. I introduced you two because I believe you might forge a rare, meaningful connection. I'm not asking you to do anything you don't want to, but I hope you'll remain open to him." Seiko folded her arms, weighing his request. Her eyebrows lifted. "You want me to reach out and befriend him?" Her father's voice softened. "Yes. Establish a friendly rapport, see where it goes. No pressure beyond that." Seiko paused, calm and composed. "So, you're essentially suggesting I marry him?" There was no fluster in her tone, only a poised maturity that belied her years. As a true Yamato Nadeshiko, Seiko held traditional views on marriage, but she was far from the sheltered, delicate type. She had her own ambitions, her own sense of purpose. And now, more than ever, she needed to understand who Ethan was and why her father believed they belonged in each other's lives. There was a new steely edge in her eyes, an expression born of years of brutal martial arts training and a natural instinct for combat. Her tendency toward violence and her domineering air didn't stem from cruelty, but from an unquenchable thirst for power and control. It marked her as an outsider among her peers. She had never engaged in genuine friendships with men, let alone dated with marriage in mind. In this island nation, marriages are almost business transactions, used to cement a family's standing and broaden its influence. Many aristocratic households treat their daughters as living invitations to potential sons-in-law. While a biological son is a fixed asset, bound by blood and unchangeable, marrying off a daughter is an opportunity to handpick an heir from a field of worthy candidates. Such wheeling and dealing has become so fashionable that some of the country's wealthiest magnates openly declare they prefer daughters to sons, precisely because daughters offer the freedom to select the perfect son-in-law. Saiko Busujima's father was different. He had never viewed her as a mere bargaining chip to be traded for political advantage, or as a candidate in a game of dynastic chess. For years, Shinichiro Busujima had recognized a rare spark in his daughter, a keen intellect, extraordinary physical strength, and an almost instinctive mastery of kendo. Determined to break with tradition, he resolved not to marry her off like a commodity, but to train her as his rightful heir. From the simplest cuts and footwork drills to sophisticated tactical exercises and even the rigorous forging of her spirit, he guided Eve, Mirai step of Saiko's development, with uncompromising discipline. Shinichiro's ambitions for her went far beyond crafting an exceptional swordswoman. He dreamed of Saiko becoming the heart and soul of Busujima Kendo, leading their school to a new era of glory. On the phone, Shinichiro paused, choosing his words with care. "Saiko," he began softly, "you know I've never regarded you as merely a tool for marriage." Saiko's pulse quickened at his confession. Her father continued, "Perhaps marriage sounds too severe, but I do hope you'll cultivate a strong bond with Ethan. As for how the future will unfold, that depends entirely on your own path. In these turbulent times, one more friend is worth a dozen enemies, and Ethan's talents may one day prove invaluable to you, or even to the entire Busujima family." Saiko felt a flicker of surprise. She knew her father's temperament better than anyone. He was not given to lavish praise, nor would he casually entrust the family's fortunes to a newcomer. His words revealed just how strongly Ethan had impressed him. "I understand, father. I'll give Ethan a fair chance, but the final decision is mine." Her tone was calm and resolute. She would not be swayed, even by her own father. After ending the call, Saiko settled onto the tatami in the silent living room and let her thoughts drift. From her earliest years, her upbringing had been tailored for one purpose: to shape her into the next head of the Busujima clan. Kendo practice before dawn, the precise movements of the tea ceremony, the delicate art of ikebana, the graceful strokes of calligraphy, all of it had instilled discipline and a deep sense of responsibility. Now, as the eldest daughter and heir, every choice she made carried the weight of her family's proud legacy. Saiko Busujima had pushed herself relentlessly to master every skill, not just to uphold her family's proud name, but to prove her own worth. Raised in a rigid, traditional household, she'd honed a ruthless streak alongside her extraordinary talent in kendo. Among her peers, she was virtually unbeatable, and that victory bred a cold disdain for anyone she judged weak. As a result, Saiko kept her distance in every relationship, especially with men. Then came the call from her brother, Shinichiro, announcing the arrival of a man named Ethan. For the first time, Saiko felt genuine curiosity and a spark of excitement about unearthing the secrets behind this mysterious newcomer. She quietly compiled everything she could learn of his background and abilities, but outwardly she remained detached. Let him prove himself on his own terms, she thought. "Be careful," Ethan warned, his voice calm but urgent. Before Saiko could react, he sprang forward and caught the trembling girl at his side, just in time. A heavy steel sign had come loose overhead, crashing to the floor where the girl had stood moments before. Dressed in her crisp school uniform and a white headband, she stared up at Ethan with wide, terrified eyes. If he hadn't acted, the sign would have struck her full force. Now, rattled and breathless, she had no doubt. This man was hiding talents far beyond the ordinary. The girl's cheeks flushed as she quickly bowed her head. "Thank you, sir." Ethan met her gaze and offered a small, reassuring smile. "You're welcome." Chapter 1101. We've already hit Chapter 1101, Doesn't that deserve a reward? Ethan hardly needed an introduction to recognize the girl before him. The image was just too vivid. Kasumigaoka Shiyu, the literary prodigy from How to Raise a Passerby heroine, famous for her talent and eccentric temperament. A chill ran down his spine. There was definitely something wrong with this world. He reminded himself that Busujima Saiko and Kasumigaoka Shiyu came from completely different universes. 30, 40, no, 99 worlds had somehow been layered together. The answer was obvious. This place was a grand crossover, perhaps a boundless realm of Japanese manga, even spliced with elements of Hong Kong and American variety shows. As Ethan's mind whirled with possibilities, Kasumigaoka Shiyu's soft voice broke through his reverie. Thank you for saving me. Her tone quivered, still trembling with adrenaline and relief. Ethan met her gaze, ready to piece together the bizarre tapestry of this fused multiverse. Shiyu Kasumigaoka lowered her head, clasping her hands together as if mortified by her own awkwardness. Ethan offered a gentle smile, warm, soothing, like sunlight parting storm clouds. Don't mention it, he said quietly. Anyone who could help would have done the same. His words were sincere and unpretentious. Shiyu studied the man who had just pulled her to safety. He was clearly an adult, far too refined and handsome to be called a boy, and yet his features were almost unreal. A sudden suspicion crossed her mind. Could this be some hidden camera stunt on a celebrity variety show? On islands like this, reality programs frequently staged elaborate surprises to hook viewers. What if she was about to become the unwitting star of someone else's spectacle? A chill of unease ran down her spine. It was best to leave before she ended up as someone's prize. Forcing a polite smile, she bowed slightly. Thank you again, Mr. Ethan. But in her mind, she vowed to slip away as soon as she could and avoid becoming anyone's entertainment. I've got something else to take care of, so I'm off, Kasumigaoka Shiyu said briskly, spinning on her heel and slipping away with her bodyguard in tow. Ethan didn't pursue her. Tussling with her security detail would be pointless, and there'd be other opportunities. He watched her silhouette disappear into the crowd, then murmured to himself, not a bad world. Now, how should I play this? He pressed his fingers to his temples. With his enhanced intellect and heightened senses, he could scan this entire realm for story-worthy characters, slice-of-life leads, crossover champions, anyone destined to be the hero. If this truly was a comic universe, then sooner or later a male protagonist had to turn up. His mental sweep zeroed in on Tokyo, an island nation buzzing with neon lights and crowded streets. There, in a narrow back alley, a recently bullied high school boy had just come to groaning about dump trucks crossing and a mysterious system. Exactly the sort of setup Ethan was looking for. A system-driven storyline in a crossover world. Before the teenager could even steady himself, a ripple of air flickered beside him. In the blink of an eye, Ethan's figure materialized in the alleyway, as if he'd slipped through time and space to get there. The alley was dark and damp, heavy with an almost tangible sense of despair. At its far end, a high school boy lay huddled on the ground, his pale face streaked with bruises, fresh blood still dripping from the corner of his mouth. When Ethan appeared out of thin air, the boy's eyes widened in shock. What was happening? One moment he'd believed this world was nothing but a comic book fantasy. The next, someone had literally dropped into his reality. Deep within the boy's chest, his system quivered in response to Ethan's arrival. Thanks to his newly awakened transcendence ability, Ethan could perceive every hidden force within another person, every concept, every abstract essence. Sure enough, a small, iridescent orb of light pulsed inside the boy's rib cage. That had to be his system. Under Ethan's unwavering gaze, the orb shrank back on itself as if seeking refuge, curling into a denser, more protective form. Powerful as it was in its own domain, the system suddenly seemed fragile and vulnerable before someone of Ethan's extraordinary presence. Ethan didn't hesitate. He strode past the bewildered time traveler, plunged his hand into the man's chest, and ripped out the alien device lodged in his ribs. The traveler collapsed, turning to ash in an instant, his last scream swallowed by the night. Ethan glanced at the ashes, then let them drift away on a sudden gust of wind before turning his attention to the small, iridescent orb now clutched in his palm. "Speak," he ordered, voice low. The orb pulsed once, twice, and then projected a clear, girlish voice. Greetings, Master. I am the Super Invincible System. It is my honor to serve you. Ethan's eyes narrowed. With a flick of his wrist, he sent the orb tumbling into a tiny pocket dimension concealed within his coat. Immediately, bolts of lightning crackled around that hidden space. Thunder boomed, and miniature explosions rattled the air. After a few tense seconds, the battered orb reappeared, its surface scorched and smoking. He held it up and said crisply, "First, what capabilities do you grant me? Second, what's the current situation on Earth? And third, lose the high-pitched voice. From now on, speak in a neutral tone." Ethan turned the little sphere over in his hand, weighing its possibilities. It was undeniably powerful, perhaps even world-class, but could it rival a starburst? And although it claimed vast strength, interstellar travel still seemed beyond its reach. For now, he would have to make do and discover just how far the Super Invincible System could take him. Ethan stared at the glowing text before him, trying to wrap his head around it. System, I'm the junior component, tasked with harvesting raw emotional energy from humans. I can absorb both negative and positive feelings, then convert that energy to manifest whatever you need. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Manifest what exactly? He could only guess. Reviving spiritual power, pulling the strings as some hidden mastermind, maybe even unleashing a shockwave. The system went on to clarify that, despite this being a comic book world, there really were no supernatural forces, only everyday reality dressed up in capes and villains. Ethan wondered, half in jest, whether he'd be organizing a rock concert a la Xiao Haige to fight monsters next. A new line of text blinked onto the display. Your first task is, surprise, collect emotional energy from a target. But Ethan knew it wasn't that simple. Emotions had to cross a certain intensity threshold before the system could siphon them. I've already made the arrangements, the system bragged. Our host will stage a ghost scare attraction. Nothing spikes human emotions like a good old-fashioned haunting. Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose. Is this really how the Monster Power Company operates? He grumbled. Scare people senseless, then bottle their terror? He let out a slow breath. Well, if ghosts were the easiest ticket to raw energy, he supposed he'd have to go along with it, at least for now. Ethan stepped into the dimly lit chamber, his boots echoing against the metal floor. The holographic interface before him flickered nervously. Master, you're alive, it blurted, then stammered. Boss, you're so powerful. Why won't you bind me? I could be invaluable. With sufficient energy, I can materialize anything you need. The system's tone flipped from outright fear to eager flattery. It had seen dozens, no, hundreds, of previous hosts come and go, all promising to conquer its demands, all meeting the same tragic end. Each time a host fell, the system simply reached out for someone new. Now it had chosen Ethan. Bind you? Ethan repeated, his voice calm but edged with steel. He crossed his arms, studying the wavering light of the hologram. He'd endured binding before, first in the Marvel sector, then in DC, each time paying in blood and shattered freedom. He refused to relive that nightmare. No, he said softly, I won't be your prisoner. He turned away, leaving the system's holographic scream trailing behind him. The decision was made. This time, he would control the game.